The night was heavy with fog, thick as unspun wool, draped over the shattered landscape of the Western Front. Moonlight barely managed to pierce the curtain of smoke and mist, casting pale silver streaks over broken helmets, splintered rifles, and the endless maze of trenches that scarred the earth like wounds that refused to heal. Private Thomas Alcott sat with his back against a wall of damp sandbags, his hands wrapped around a tin mug that had long since lost its warmth. Around him, the faint murmurs of soldiers mixed with the far-off rumble of artillery. Somewhere beyond the mist, an owl called, a rare, fragile sound amid the noise of a world gone mad. It was a quiet night by the standards of war. That meant no shells falling nearby, no raids, no screams. Just the whisper of wind through barbed wire and the soft crackle of a cigarette. For Thomas, those were the moments when imagination began to fill the silence. Memories of green fields back home, of his mother's garden, of the laughter of his little sister before the war had swallowed them all whole. "Hey, Tommy," came a low voice beside him. It was Corporal Hughes, a wiry man with a sharp nose and a perpetual smudge of soot on his cheek. "They say the engineers are working on something new. Something strange." Thomas looked up, weary eyes catching the glint of Hughes's cigarette. "Strange how?" Hughes shrugged. "A tree. But not a real one. Steel on the inside, bark on the outside. Hollow, they say. A fake tree they'll plant right in no man's land." Thomas frowned. "A fake tree? What for?" Hughes leaned closer, lowering his voice. "To see. To watch the Huns. They say an observer can climb inside, look through tiny holes, and spot enemy movement without ever being noticed." Thomas gave a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "You're telling me they're going to build a tree on a battlefield? Where nothing lives anymore?" Hughes grinned. "Exactly. Who'd ever suspect a dead tree? That's the beauty of it." The idea sounded absurd, yet something about it captured Thomas's imagination. A tree of steel and secrecy, standing alone among the ruins, pretending to be alive when everything around it had already died. He took a slow breath, tasting the damp, metallic air. The war had a way of twisting reality, of turning impossible things into ordinary ones. After all, men were living underground like moles, firing at shadows through periscopes, and carrying messages with pigeons. Why not a steel tree? The next morning brought pale light and a thin drizzle. The trench walls wept water, and the men moved like ghosts, their uniforms caked with mud. Orders came down that 2 engineers and a small team would be heading to the forward line that night. They were to observe terrain for a special construction project. Thomas was one of them. As dusk fell again, the group crawled through a communication trench that twisted like a serpent toward the front. The world grew quieter the farther they went, until only the distant popping of rifles remained. The air smelled of cordite and decay. When they reached the lip of the trench, the lieutenant in charge raised his hand. "No talking now," he whispered. "We move fast. Eyes open." They slipped over the edge into the wasteland. Every step sank into soft mud that sucked at their boots. The horizon was broken by the black skeletons of trees, their branches shattered and bare, silent witnesses to years of fire and smoke. Thomas followed close behind the engineers, his heart pounding. Every shadow looked alive. The sound of his own breathing seemed too loud. He could hear Hughes muttering a prayer behind him. They stopped beside what had once been a tall elm, now reduced to a jagged stump. One of the engineers, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses, knelt beside it, studying it with a strange reverence. "This one," he said softly. "It's perfect." The lieutenant nodded. "Mark it. Tomorrow night we replace it." Thomas looked from the broken tree to the endless, desolate plain beyond. The idea still felt unreal, yet in that moment, he could almost imagine it, a hollow steel trunk, standing quietly under moonlight, watching everything. A silent guardian in a land of ruin. As they crawled back toward the safety of the trench, a flare burst overhead, turning night into day. Thomas froze, his body pressed flat against the cold earth. For a heartbeat, he thought the world had found him, that the sky itself was searching. But then the light faded, and the darkness returned. Back in the trench, Hughes exhaled shakily. "You think it'll work?" he whispered. Thomas didn't answer at first. He stared out over the edge of the parapet, toward where the tree stump waited. "I think," he said finally, "it's the only kind of thing that still makes sense here. Something that pretends to be what it isn't." Hughes gave a tired laugh. "Like us, then." The 2 men fell silent again as the fog rolled back in, swallowing the trenches, the ruins, and even the sky. Somewhere out there, between the lines, the chosen tree stood waiting, soon to be reborn as something stranger, something made of iron and secrecy. And in the stillness of that night, the first whispers of the camouflage tree began to take root. By the next evening, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean and ghostly. The trenches still dripped with muddy water, but above them the air hung still, waiting. Every man seemed to move with purpose that night, as if the earth itself was holding its breath for what was about to happen. Thomas Alcott sat on a crate near the engineering section, watching the men at work. Under a canvas tarp, lanterns glowed dimly, revealing the strange shape taking form within the shadows, the skeleton of the tree. It stood about 12 feet high, its trunk made from sections of riveted steel, hollow from base to crown. Around it, the engineers bent sheets of thin iron, hammering them into the rough contours of bark. The sound of each strike was muffled under heavy blankets. Everything was done in whispers, as if they feared the night itself might eavesdrop. Thomas couldn't look away. Even without its disguise, the thing already seemed alive, eerie in its perfection. Inside the trunk, a narrow ladder spiraled upward to a small perch. From there, the observer could look through tiny holes disguised as knots in the bark. "Clever devils," Hughes murmured beside him, his voice low and full of admiration. "They'll dress it in real bark tomorrow, from the one we found." "The dead elm?" Thomas nodded, saying nothing. The chief engineer, Captain Rowley, stood nearby with his sleeves rolled up, his uniform spattered with oil. He was a tall, calm man whose spectacles caught the lantern light. "It's not enough for it to look like a tree," he said to his team. "It must become one. Every splinter, every crack, they'll compare it to the old stump. If it's even slightly wrong, they'll see it." His tone was quiet but certain. It made Thomas realize how much depended on small things, on a curve of bark or a twist of wire. Hours passed in near silence. The tree took on its skin, rough, gray, and scarred. Real branches from the dead elm were bolted to its sides. Mud and ash were rubbed into every seam until the steel disappeared beneath a convincing mask of decay. At last, Captain Rowley stepped back. "Good," he said softly. "Now it's ready to die." Thomas didn't understand what he meant until the captain explained. They would remove the real tree and plant this imitation in its place, before dawn, while the Germans slept. The operation had to be done in complete darkness, a single flare, a single sound, and it would all be over. The men slept in turns that afternoon, though few managed more than an hour. At twilight they gathered again, preparing for the task. The steel tree was loaded onto a flat wooden sled, covered with burlap and branches. The smallest creak was enough to make hearts stop. When the order came, they moved out. The night was black and airless. Clouds blotted out the stars, and even the horizon had vanished into shadow. The team of 10 men hauled the sled inch by inch across no man's land. The mud clung to their boots like tar. Somewhere far away, artillery rumbled, a distant thunder that hid their noise. Thomas's hands ached as he pulled on the rope. The weight of the tree pressed into the earth like a secret that didn't want to be moved. Every few minutes, the lieutenant signaled for a halt, listening for the faintest sign of enemy movement. Nothing. Only the whisper of wind over the dead ground. At last, they reached the shattered stump of the old elm. It looked just as they had left it, jagged, broken, half buried in the muck. "Work fast," Captain Rowley ordered. 2 men began to saw through the roots that still clung to the soil, muffling the sound with coats. Others dug quietly, hands sinking into the cold, wet earth. When the stump finally gave way, it toppled with a dull, heavy thud. The engineers moved quickly, setting the steel trunk in its place. Thomas helped to steady it, feeling the cold metal beneath its false bark. For a moment, the new tree stood awkwardly, leaning to one side. Then the men packed earth around its base, propping it upright until it seemed to grow naturally from the mud. Under the faint light of a clouded moon, it was perfect. Even standing a few feet away, Thomas could barely tell it from the real thing. The bark looked weathered, the branches ragged and lifeless. Only the faint scent of oil betrayed the truth. "Inside," Rowley said quietly. Thomas turned. "Me?" The captain nodded. "You and Hughes will test the view. We need to know if it's worth the risk." Thomas's throat tightened. He looked at the narrow opening in the base, a small hatch hidden among knots of bark. The idea of climbing inside something so unnatural filled him with unease. But he nodded, gripping his rifle and crawling forward. The interior was dark and close, smelling faintly of iron and mud. He climbed the small ladder, feeling each rung cold under his hands. At the top, he reached the observation slit, no larger than a coin. Through it, he saw the German lines stretched out before him, ghostly and quiet beneath the mist. He could see everything. A chill ran through him, part awe, part dread. Below, Captain Rowley's voice was barely a whisper. "All right, gentlemen. Tonight the tree belongs to us." And as dawn began to pale the sky, the steel tree stood alone in no man's land, silent, lifeless, yet more alive than any tree had been in years. The morning came quietly, as if afraid to wake the dead. A soft mist hovered low across the ground, blurring the horizon until the trenches seemed to float on clouds. For the first time in months, the guns were silent. It was the kind of fragile calm that made the soldiers more uneasy than comforted. From his hiding place inside the steel tree, Thomas Alcott could feel the world breathing outside. Every sound, the faint buzz of flies, the drip of condensation sliding down the metal walls, felt magnified in the hush of dawn. He had been awake for hours, half from nerves, half from awe. He had expected the inside to be unbearable, cramped, suffocating, but it was oddly peaceful. The narrow ladder ran behind him, and the small seat at the top was just wide enough to rest on. The air smelled faintly of oil and damp bark. Through the slit in front of him, no wider than a buttonhole, he could see the enemy line, blurred by distance and fog. Below, Hughes shifted. The faint scrape of boots echoed softly. "Can you see them?" he whispered. "Not yet," Thomas murmured back. "Just emptiness. Like the world's forgotten we're here. That's how I like it," Hughes said. "The fewer people remember, the longer we live." Thomas smiled faintly. It was strange, sitting inside a dead tree, pretending to be something that belonged to nature. He wondered if the Germans could sense it, that somewhere out there, one of the trees had eyes. Hours passed. The mist thickened, then thinned again, and the sunlight shifted across the ruined land. The steel tree creaked softly as it warmed. Each sound seemed dangerously loud, yet no alarm rose from the enemy line. At midday, Thomas opened a small tin of biscuits and shared them with Hughes. They ate in silence, careful not to let crumbs fall. The tin made a tiny metallic click as it shut, a sound that might have been nothing, but in this world of stillness, it was everything. Then, through the slit, Thomas saw movement. A small group of German soldiers appeared, climbing from their trench. They moved cautiously, carrying boards and tools. One of them lit a cigarette, and the flare of the match glowed orange through the mist. Thomas felt his heart quicken. He reached for the field notebook at his side and began sketching the layout of their parapet, the path of the communication trench, the position of a new machine gun nest taking shape near a ruined farmhouse. Every line he drew might save lives later, might decide the next bombardment, the next advance. Hughes watched quietly, peering through another slit. "They're getting bold," he murmured. "They don't expect eyes this close." Thomas nodded, never looking away. "That's why this matters." The afternoon passed like a dream, slow, silent, and endless. The men outside changed shifts, built, moved, smoked. Each detail was noted in careful handwriting. The sun dipped, and the shadows lengthened until the world turned the color of rust and ash. When darkness finally crept across no man's land, the sounds of the front returned, the distant crack of rifles, the dull thud of shells miles away. But the tree stood still, unmoving, part of the landscape. Inside, Thomas shifted his aching legs. His back hurt from sitting so long. Hughes rubbed his hands together, blowing into them to fight the cold. "Think they'll remember we're out here?" Hughes said with a forced grin. "They'd better," Thomas replied softly. "Or we'll be fossils by morning." They both laughed quietly, their breath turning to mist. Then, a sound. Faint, but wrong. A metallic tap, somewhere close outside. Hughes froze. Thomas held his breath. The sound came again, like a bayonet striking metal. Then a German voice, low and questioning. Someone was near. Thomas's heart hammered. He slowly leaned toward the slit. Through the narrow gap, he saw a shadow, a figure crouching beside the base of the tree. The soldier's helmet caught the dim moonlight. He was close enough to touch. Thomas could see the man's hand brushing the bark, curious. Then, with a small shrug, the German stood, spat into the mud, and walked away. It was only when the figure disappeared back into the mist that Thomas realized he had been holding his breath for almost a minute. He exhaled shakily. Hughes let out a quiet curse under his breath. "Too close," he whispered. Thomas nodded. "We're ghosts. They can't know we exist." The rest of the night passed in near silence. Each creak of the steel trunk sounded louder, each gust of wind felt sharper. Yet nothing happened. When the first faint light of dawn returned, the world looked unchanged, calm, indifferent. As they crawled back to the trench before sunrise, mud clinging to their clothes, the men waiting for them greeted them with silent relief. Captain Rowley examined the notebook, flipping through the sketches and notes, with the care of a man holding treasure. "This is excellent work," he said quietly. "Every detail matters. We'll adjust our positions tonight. You've done well, both of you." Thomas glanced back toward the horizon, where the steel tree still stood, unmoving, lifeless, and yet watching. "It's strange," he murmured. "Out there, it feels like time stops. Like the war doesn't exist for a while." Hughes chuckled. "Until someone pokes it with a bayonet." They laughed softly, and for a brief moment, the world felt human again. But deep inside, Thomas knew the tree was more than just metal and bark. It was becoming something else, a witness, silent and eternal, to everything that men tried to hide. and tomorrow, they would climb inside again. By the time dawn bled once more across the shattered landscape, the hollow trees had multiplied. One by one, along the British and French sectors, they appeared overnight like strange steel fungi, rooted in the mud. Each was a miracle of deception, welded in secret, painted with streaks of brown and gray, their surfaces studded with fragments of real bark collected from fallen trunks. From a distance, they looked pitiful and harmless, the skeletons of a forest that had died long ago. But hidden inside them were the eyes of the Allies, soldiers with sketchbooks, binoculars, and nerves strong enough to withstand hours of stillness. Thomas Alcott was becoming one of them. It had been 2 weeks since his first night inside the steel tree. He had learned how to breathe silently, how to shift without noise, how to control even his heartbeat when footsteps approached. At night, when he returned to the trench, he felt almost like a machine himself, built for observation, not emotion. Hughes, on the other hand, remained defiantly human. "You realize," he said one morning, stirring his tea with a stick, "that one day some poor soul will find those trees and think we turned the forest into ghosts." Thomas smiled faintly. "Maybe we did." Hughes laughed, though there was no humor in it. "If the war lasts much longer, there'll be nothing left but ghosts." The silence that followed was heavy. Around them, the trench hummed with quiet activity, the scrape of shovels, the soft muttering of men mending sandbags, the faint chug of a field kitchen in the distance. Overhead, the sky was pale and washed out, like an old photograph. Later that day, Captain Rowley called them to a briefing. Aerial photographs had shown movement behind the German line, a new battery of guns, possibly hidden in a small grove just beyond the ridge. The next tree mission would be longer. Alcott and Hughes would spend the entire night inside, noting flashes, counting shells, timing intervals. "Your reports have been invaluable," Rowley said quietly. "But be careful. If they suspect one of the trees isn't what it seems." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what would happen if the enemy realized that one of their blasted trunks was made of steel. That evening, the two men prepared in silence. Each carried only what was necessary: a notebook, pencils, a small periscope, a ration tin, and their nerves. The engineers helped them cross the wire under cover of darkness. The moon was a thin silver slice above the clouds, offering just enough light to see the ruinous shapes of the battlefield. When they reached the tree, Thomas felt the familiar shiver of fear and awe. The metal was cold beneath his gloves. He climbed first, ascending into the hollow trunk, his breath echoing softly in the narrow space. Hughes followed, sealing the hatch behind them. And then, once more, the silence took hold. Hours passed. The front slept uneasily, distant gunfire, a flicker of light on the horizon, the occasional whisper of wine through the broken landscape. Through the narrow slit, Thomas saw the faint glow of German lanterns. Shadows moved back and forth, men carrying shells, adjusting the angle of guns, preparing for something large. He took notes in careful script, marking time after time as each muzzle flash erupted. The light illuminated the mist for a heartbeat, then vanished into blackness. The sound was delayed, a low, rolling boom that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of the earth. 2 minutes between each, Hughes whispered. "Closer to 90 seconds now," Thomas replied. "They're accelerating." They wrote everything down. Distances, directions, rhythm. It wasn't romantic work, but it was precise, the kind of observation that made artillery smarter, more deadly. At one point, Thomas leaned back, stretching his stiff neck. The inside of the tree was utterly black. Only the faintest thread of moonlight seeped in. The air had grown thick and stale. Sweat gathered at the back of his collar despite the cold. Outside, the German guns thundered again. He thought about the irony, men hiding inside fake trees to watch other men destroy real ones. The war had turned nature into a mask, and the forest into a lie. "Do you ever think about what we're doing?" Thomas whispered suddenly. "We hide inside a tree to see better, but the more we see, the worse it gets." Hughes chuckled softly. "Don't think too hard, lad. The tree doesn't. That's how it survives." The hours stretched until dawn. When the eastern sky began to pale, the German guns fell silent at last. Smoke drifted across the fields like a gray tide. Somewhere, a lark sang, its fragile song lost amid the emptiness. As they waited for the engineers to return, Thomas looked once more through the slit. The enemy trenches were still, but something caught his eye, a faint movement, too rhythmic to be the wind. A German observer. In another tree. For a brief moment, their lines of sight aligned perfectly, one hidden man staring unknowingly into the eyes of another, both disguised as nature. Two ghosts, separated by mud, fear, and the absurd genius of war. Thomas froze. The realization hit him with strange wonder. Perhaps the Germans had their own steel trees. Perhaps the whole forest was alive with watchers, silent, sleepless, pretending to be dead. He said nothing, only stared, until the mist swallowed the shape once more. When they finally crawled back to safety, Rowley met them with tired eyes. "You've confirmed the battery," he said. "We'll send coordinates to the artillery tonight." Thomas nodded, but his thoughts lingered on that other tree, that shadow across the field. In a war where even the trees were spies, what part of the earth could still be trusted? By mid-1916, the war had devoured everything green. Where once stood orchards and groves, only jagged splinters remained, skeletal fingers reaching into a sky stained with smoke. But along the front, something strange began to happen. The trees started to come back. They rose silently, one by one, under the cover of night. Not grown from soil or sun, but hammered into shape by blacksmiths and engineers. The new forest was made of steel and deception, hollow trunks, riveted branches, painted scars. Each one carefully positioned to replace a real tree that had been blasted apart. To an untrained eye, it looked like life returning. To those who knew, it was the opposite, a forest of spies. Thomas Alcott first noticed the difference when he looked across no man's land and saw what seemed to be too many trees. The horizon, which had been barren for months, now had silhouettes again. Some were familiar, he remembered their twisted shapes, but others looked identical. The same angle of broken limb, the same curve of trunk. When he mentioned it to Captain Rowley, the officer only nodded grimly. "They're learning from us. We started a new kind of forest, and now it's spreading." Rumors spread through the trenches that both sides were filling the battlefield with artificial life. Hollow logs, fake stones, even mock horse carcasses concealing cameras and wires. The land itself had become a masquerade, and the soldiers who lived among it began to lose their sense of what was natural. At night, Thomas would dream of walking through a forest of iron. Every step rang with hollow echoes. The leaves were shards of tin, the wind smelled of rust. And yet, the sound of birdsong still drifted somewhere, faint, mechanical, endlessly repeating. In waking life, it wasn't much different. When he crawled out to the observation tree again, the world felt emptier, flatter. He no longer trusted the shapes he saw. "See that one?" Hughes whispered one morning, pointing toward a stump just beyond the German wire. "Looks solid, doesn't it?" Thomas narrowed his eyes. The stump sat slightly higher than it should. And when the sun rose behind it, the shadow it cast was wrong, too sharp, too straight. "That's one of theirs," Thomas murmured. Hughes grinned. "Then we've got company." The irony was hard to ignore. Each side now watched the other through metal trees pretending to be wood, through periscopes disguised as knots and branches. Nature had been rewritten into something cunning. Even the birds avoided the place. Days passed in this uneasy equilibrium. Both armies stared through fake trunks, making notes about the other's movements, pretending not to notice that they were doing the same thing. The war had reached a point of absurd reflection, as if two mirrors faced each other, each showing a copy of the same silent deceit. One evening, Thomas climbed into the tree alone. Hughes had been reassigned to the line farther south, and the silence inside felt heavier without his quiet humor. Outside, rain whispered through the mud. Through the narrow slit, he could see the new forest the Germans had planted, tall, proud, impossibly still. He thought about the engineers who built them. Men of talent, trained to shape metal for beauty or progress, now using that skill to create the illusion of life. It felt poetic and cruel. After hours of stillness, a shell exploded far down the line, sending a shiver through the ground. The tree trembled faintly. Thomas pressed his hand to the steel wall, feeling the vibration fade. Somewhere beneath the noise, he thought he could still hear the old heartbeat of the earth, slow, patient, waiting for the madness to end. He took out his notebook and began to write, though not about guns or coordinates this time. He wrote about the strange beauty of the fake forest, how it stood motionless while men destroyed each other below, how it pretended to be alive so that the living could pretend they weren't dying. It was, he thought, the perfect symbol of the war. When dawn came, the mist was thick again. For a moment, the fake forest looked almost real, silver trunks fading into fog, their branches glistening with dew that wasn't dew at all but condensed breath from the previous night. A nightingale sang somewhere in the distance, its song carrying faintly over the desolation. Thomas smiled despite himself. The sound was genuine, fragile, and heartbreakingly alive. He thought about all the fake trees, fake hills, fake cover, and then about that one small, real bird that had somehow survived it all. Maybe that was enough, he thought. Maybe that was what still made the world worth watching. When he returned to the trench, Captain Rowley was waiting. "We've confirmed their decoys," the captain said. "We'll strike the grove tonight. Artillery at midnight." Thomas hesitated, glancing back toward the horizon. For a brief moment, he imagined all the steel trees erupting together, collapsing in sparks and flame, a man-made forest dying a second death. The thought filled him not with triumph, but with sadness. Hughes was right, he realized. The forest that never lived was just another kind of graveyard. You awakened before dawn, or perhaps you never truly slept. The dugout breathes with the slow rhythm of men half lost to exhaustion. Somewhere in the darkness, a match flares, someone lighting a cigarette. The brief glow reveals hollow eyes, faces carved by sleeplessness, then vanishes again into the damp air. The faint scent of tobacco drifts through the stale smell of earth and sweat. Outside, the world is blue with fog. You crawl out, careful not to clatter against the corrugated iron entrance. A faint drizzle hisses as it touches the tin helmets left out overnight. The trench is quiet except for the occasional slap of boots on duckboards. Far beyond, artillery mutters like a giant talking in its sleep. You hear a low voice, Corporal Mason, the same one who guided you the day before. "Come on," he whispers. "We're moving before first light." He leads you down a narrow communication trench, shoulders brushing the mud walls. The path twists endlessly, lined with sandbags that ooze rainwater. You keep your rifle slung, though you know it will be useless if the enemy spots you. Observation missions rely not on strength, but silence. The fog thickens as you reach the forward line. A sentry nods, barely visible in the mist. His breath forms pale clouds. Beyond the parapet, no man's land waits, flat, lifeless, and unknowable. In your mind, the hollow steel tree rises again, as vivid as a phantom. You imagine it standing there already, a silent witness among shattered trunks. Soon, one of these lifeless silhouettes will not be wood, but iron. Mason points toward the line of stumps just beyond the wire. "That's where you'll go," he says quietly. "Tree number 12. We marked the spot last night." You swallow, your throat dry. "How close is it?" 60 yards out." He pauses. "Don't think about it. Just move when the guns start again. They won't see you through the smoke." The idea is simple in theory. Replace a real, dead tree with a hollow steel copy. The trunk, painted and scarred to match its surroundings, contains a narrow steel ladder and a small observation slit at the top. From there, one man can watch the enemy's trenches, mark artillery targets, and listen for movement. It's a perfect illusion, if you can survive long enough to install it. The plan depends entirely on darkness, noise, and timing. While the artillery pounds the opposite side, the engineers will crawl into no man's land, cut down the original tree, and plant the fake one in its place. Every movement must be invisible. You wait in silence as Mason checks his watch. Time slows to a thick, syrupy crawl. Then, from somewhere deep behind you, the first shell whistles overhead. A heartbeat later, the horizon erupts in light. "Go," he says. You climb over the parapet and slide into the open. The earth trembles with every blast. Mud jumps from the ground. Smoke and fire mix into a dense, choking veil that hides everything. You crawl on your belly, the wet soil pressing against your chest. The world around you is all thunder and flashes. When the barrage pauses, you freeze. The silence feels worse than the noise. You can hear your own heartbeat, the faint ticking of metal in your pocket watch. Then, another explosion, closer this time, rains dirt over you. You reach the base of the chosen stump. It's barely taller than a man, splintered from an earlier shell. You run your hand over the rough bark, feeling where the saw will bite. Behind you, the engineers drag the steel shell forward, heavy, cold, and gleaming faintly in the dim light. Working by touch, they begin their grim task. One saws, another steadies the fallen trunk. Every few seconds, you all freeze, waiting for a flare or a sound. The moment a white light blooms overhead, everyone drops flat, motionless, faces pressed to the mud until it fades. Then the rhythm resumes: cut, breathe, lift, dig. The false tree is lowered into place, anchored with bolts and stakes. Its hollow core swallows sound like a tomb. Mason wipes the sweat from his brow and gestures for you to climb. "You're up, lad. Make it count." You grip the cold steel rungs and ascend. The inside smells of oil and rust. Each step echoes faintly. When you reach the top, you peer through the narrow slit. The view steals your breath. The enemy lines stretch across the gray morning, empty and still. Broken wire, shell holes filled with rain, and the ghostly shapes of other trees. Smoke hangs low, curling around the world like a shroud. You raise your field glasses and adjust the focus. There, movement. Tiny figures, far off, shifting supplies or tending a gun. They look so small, so human. For a moment, you forget that they are meant to be your enemies. You take notes in a small, leather-bound book, coordinates, patterns, flashes of light from a distant battery. Each stroke of the pencil feels heavier than the last. Hours pass unnoticed. The world remains hushed, except for distant rumbling. Once, a bullet snaps against a metal trunk, just once, and the sound rings in your skull like a bell. You wait, breath held, until it's clear no one saw. When the sun finally rises through the haze, you see what few men ever do, both sides of the war, quiet and waiting, separated by nothing but fear and mud. From below, Mason's whisper climbs through the hollow tube. Time to come down. We made it. You descend, muscles trembling, and touch solid ground again. The fake tree stands perfect, proud, and silent, an iron ghost among the dead. That night, back in the trench, you lie awake listening to the rain on the tin roof. Above you, out there in no man's land, your hollow tree watches in your place, unblinking. Tomorrow, the officers will study your notes, plan their strikes, move their guns. But you will remember only the quiet, the strange, holy quiet of the battlefield before dawn, and the knowledge that, for a few fragile hours, you saw everything, and were seen by no one. When morning comes, the rain has stopped, leaving a pale film of mist over the battlefield. You rise before the others, boots sinking into the soft mud, and look toward no man's land. Somewhere out there, invisible beneath the drifting fog, stands your steel tree. You can't see it, but you know it's there, watching, listening, waiting. Captain Langley arrives with his notebook tucked under one arm and a cup of steaming tea in his hand. He's one of those officers who seems too calm for war, as if he's always 3 steps removed from the chaos. His boots are polished even here, though you suspect it's only because he does it himself. Well done last night, he says, voice low but steady. Command's pleased. You'll be pleased to know that the information you gathered already saved us a good bit of trouble. Enemy guns have shifted further south. You nod, though you're not sure how to feel. The quiet satisfaction of success mixes with something heavier, something like guilt. Observation is clean work, but what follows never is. Langley notices your silence. You did your part. Remember, the man who sees clearly often spares lives, not ends them. His words drift through your mind as you follow him down the trench toward the camouflage shed. Inside, a handful of engineers and artists, yes, artists, are at work on the next phase. What you see there would surprise anyone who believes the front line is nothing but mud and blood. The shed is alive with color. Pails of paint, brushes, bits of bark, canvas, and metal scraps clutter every surface. A Frenchman named Dupont, formerly a theater set designer, works beside a Scottish sculptor and a pair of carpenters from Leeds. Their job is not to fight but to deceive. Our brave observer returns, Dupont says with a grin, his mustache twitching. Tell me, how did my creation perform under fire? Perfectly, you answer. They never suspected. Good. That's the point, no? He steps back from his current work, another false tree trunk, its surface painted in dozens of shades of gray and brown. Up close, it looks like chaos, random splashes and streaks, but when you step back a few feet, it becomes real. The illusion is uncanny. Dupont dips his brush and gestures toward a battered photograph pinned to the wall. We study the light, always the light. It changes everything. Too red, too dark, and the eye will catch it even from a mile away. You must make the shadows lie for you. He speaks like a poet, and in a way, he is one. War has taken his stage, but not his art. The theater now stretches across miles of torn ground, and the audience is armed with rifles and telescopes. Nearby, a carpenter hammers rivets into a sheet of curved steel. Sparks jump in the dimness. The sound is strangely comforting, a rhythm of purpose amid chaos. Langley leans close to you. The Germans have their own camouflage experts now. They even use painted screens to hide their guns. The game changes daily. He gestures toward a row of finished structures, false rocks, stumps, even a fake cartwheel meant to conceal a field telephone. The ingenuity is astonishing. War, it seems, breeds creativity in the strangest ways. Later that afternoon, you help transport the new materials to the forward line. The sky is clear for once, a fragile blue dome over the wreckage. The air smells faintly of cordite and crushed grass. Along the way, you pass a group of infantrymen cleaning their rifles. One of them, a boy no older than 19, looks up. You're one of them artist fellas, ain't ya? Making them fake trees and whatnot? You hesitate before answering. Something like that. He laughs softly. Well, if your trees keep the snipers guessing, I'll buy you a pint after this mess. You nod, though both of you know that. After this mess. Feels impossibly far away. By evening, you and the team reach the site where the next disguise will be placed. This time, it's not a tree but a hollowed log, meant to hide a field telephone operator within arm's reach of the enemy wire. The danger is greater, but so is the value. As the sun sinks, you crouch with Dupont behind a rise in the earth. He studies the horizon with an artist's patience. See there, he whispers. The shadow of that broken oak? The light fades from left to right. We must match it exactly, or all this, he gestures to the painted log, is worthless. The two of you work in silence, adjusting the tones, brushing away the too bright gleam of metal with a smear of ash. The world turns golden, then gray, then black. When the last stroke is done, the false log is invisible, perfectly married to the landscape. Later, back in the trench, DuPont raises a tin cup of tea in salute. To illusion, he says. To survival, you reply. He smiles. They are the same thing, mon ami. That night, lying in your bunk, you think about his words. He's right, of course. Every day here is an illusion, one more fragile deception between life and death. You imagine your steel tree again, standing alone under the stars. In daylight, it is a lie. In the dark, it becomes truth. It watches for you, guards your comrades, gathers the whispers of the enemy. And in the end, it is the only thing that sees everything clearly. Somewhere far away, a flare rises, briefly lighting the battlefield in silver. You catch a glimpse of the broken landscape, the shattered woods, and, if your eyes aren't deceiving you, a faint, slender silhouette that might just be your tree. You smile in the darkness, not sure if it's pride or sorrow that fills your chest. Perhaps both. Tomorrow, there will be another disguise, another trick to fool the watchful eyes beyond the wire. The war is fought not only with bullets and shells, but with shadows, paint, and silence. And you, observer, artist, ghost, are learning that the truest victories come from being unseen. The night is still. The kind of stillness that feels unnatural, stretched too tight, like the world itself is holding its breath. You move through the trench with careful steps, boots sinking softly in the damp earth, until you reach the forward post where the hollow steel tree stands. Its silhouette rises faintly against the dim horizon, blackened, twisted, and entirely believable as the corpse of a once living oak. Tonight, it's your turn inside. A small group gathers around as you prepare. Sergeant Ellis helps you fasten the straps of your field gear while murmuring half-jokes to cut the tension. Try not to fall asleep in there, he says. You snore, the whole German line will open fire. You give him a thin smile. If they do, at least I won't hear it. He pats your shoulder, and then you're on your own, crawling through a shallow cut in the ground that leads to the tree's hidden hatch. The steel door is narrow, disguised beneath painted bark. You squeeze through, boots scraping metal, and pull it shut behind you. The sound echoes, a dull thunk swallowed by the night. Inside, the air is colder than you expected. The metal trunk amplifies every sound, your own breathing, the faint creak of your jacket, even the blood rushing in your ears. You crouch, then slowly straighten until you're standing inside the narrow cylinder. It's barely wide enough to turn around. Your eyes adjust. There's just enough moonlight seeping through the viewing slit to illuminate the cramped interior. The floor is a steel ring, bolted into the base of the trunk. Above it, a small wooden platform holds a periscope-like device, your eyes. Through it, you can watch the enemy's front line without being seen. You press your face against the eyepiece. The world outside flickers into view, a gray wash of shapes and shadows. Barbed wire glints faintly. In the far distance, you can just make out movement, the shifting silhouettes of men changing positions along the German trench. You jot down quick notes in a small notebook strapped to your wrist. Positions, movements, light sources. Every detail matters. Every second counts. But observation is only part of the job tonight. The steel tree has another purpose, to listen. You lower the scope and reach for the small acoustic tube mounted against the inner wall. It's a primitive device, nothing more than a thin metal pipe extending through the shell of the trunk. On the outside, it's disguised as a broken branch. Inside, it channels sound like an ear pressed to the world. You bring it close. At first, there's nothing but the faint hiss of wind. Then, gradually, you begin to hear voices. Muffled, distant, but clear enough to distinguish rhythm and tone. German, two men talking, maybe 30 yards away. You strain to listen. Wechsel Morgan. Wir like Vortagesenbruch. You recognize enough to piece it together. A shift, tomorrow, before dawn. Possibly a movement of troops. You jot the details quickly, then press your ear again. The voices fade. A new sound takes their place. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of metal on metal. A hammer? A spade? It's hard to tell. The acoustics distort everything, turning ordinary noises into something ghostly. Time moves strangely inside the tree. Minutes stretch, then collapse. The darkness presses close, and you become aware of how confined the space is, how every breath warms the steel walls just enough for condensation to form. The air smells faintly of oil and damp cloth. You shift your weight, the metal floor groaning softly beneath your boots. Instantly you freeze. Outside, a flare arcs into the sky, bathing no man's land in white light. Through the slit, you watch it bloom and fall, shadows springing to life across the cratered earth. For a moment, you feel naked, as if the entire world can see you hiding inside your metal shell. But the light fades. The night swallows everything again. You exhale, slow and quiet. Hours pass. Your notes grow longer. The Germans, it seems, are preparing something, perhaps a minor advance, perhaps just reinforcement rotation. Either way, your report will matter. You think about how absurd it is, standing inside a fake tree, alone in the dark, listening to enemies breathe. You wonder if they ever suspect that the dead trunk across from them is alive, filled with a man who watches and listens. At some point, you notice movement directly below. A small patrol creeping along the wire. Their helmets catch what little light remains. You can see their breath clouding in the cold. One stops. Looks up. For a heartbeat, your entire body locks. The soldier's gaze lingers on your tree. He tilts his head, frowning slightly. You don't move. You don't even breathe. Then, a quiet laugh, he spits into the mud, mutters something, and walks on. You stay frozen long after he's gone, every muscle trembling. The danger passes, but the echo of it lingers in your chest like a second heartbeat. When dawn finally comes, you can hardly believe it. The sky turns from black to gray to pale silver. The first shells begin to fall somewhere far behind the lines, and the tremor runs through the steel beneath your hands. You wait until the relief signal comes, a faint whistle from the trench. Then you crawl out through the narrow hatch, stiff and half-numb, the cold biting through your clothes. Sergeant Ellis greets you with a grin. Still breathing then? Barely. You mutter, handing him the notebook. He flips through the pages, eyebrows rising. Good work. Command will want this straight away. You look back once at the steel tree. The morning light makes it look eerily real, bark painted to perfection, roots half buried in mud. You realize that, from even 10 paces away, you couldn't tell it from the others. Ellis follows your gaze. Funny thing, isn't it? He says. The safest place on this front might just be inside a corpse of a tree. You nod slowly. Until someone decides to cut it down. He laughs, and the sound feels too alive for this broken world. As you walk back through the trench, you think about the irony, how survival depends on pretending to be something lifeless. The soldiers out here disguise themselves not in uniforms, but in silence, shadow, and steel. And somewhere behind the lines, another tree is being forged, hollow, cold, and waiting for the next listener to climb inside. Morning in the trenches comes not with birdsong but with the dull rumble of distant guns. You wake to the sound of shovels striking mud and a mess tin clattering somewhere nearby. The damp smell of the earth, the acrid trace of cordite, and the faint sweetness of wood smoke mingle in the air, a familiar, almost comforting blend of misery. You've been off the line for barely an hour, but already the engineers are calling for you. The new model of the observation tree is nearly finished, and they need someone who's actually used one to help refine the design. You find them working near the camouflage shed, the same place DuPont and the others transformed lumps of steel into illusions. Only now, the space is even busier. Piles of metal, coils of wire, planks of timber, and buckets of paint clutter the floor. The engineers move among them like surgeons, precise and methodical. Lieutenant Keene, the technical officer in charge, looks up as you enter. His uniform is permanently smeared with soot, and his spectacles are cracked across one lens, but his eyes are bright, the kind of brightness that comes only from obsession. Our man of the hour, he says, wiping his hands on a rag. Tell me, how did the acoustics perform? Could you make out speech, movement, perhaps even footsteps? Speech, yes, you reply, rubbing your temples. 2 men maybe 30 yards off. But beyond that, it's muddled. The vibrations are too dull through the steel. Keene nods eagerly. Exactly what I suspected. The resonance is dampened by the riveted seams. The metal eats the sound before it reaches you. He gestures to the new prototype standing in the corner. It's taller, sleeker, more refined, less like a crude cylinder and more like an actual tree trunk. This one, he says proudly, has internal sound chambers. Curved hollows that guide vibration like the body of a violin. The branch openings are fitted with copper cones. It will listen better than a human ear. DuPont, standing nearby with a paintbrush tucked behind one ear, smirks. And what if it also sings Mon Capitaine? Then we shall have a symphony of artillery. Keene ignores him, already pulling out diagrams covered in lines and circles. We're creating an acoustic mirror, you see, one that channels even whispers from no man's land. You step closer, running your hand along the surface of the unfinished steel. It's cold to the touch, but strangely alive, vibrating faintly from the hammering and grinding around you. What about the echo? You ask. Inside, every sound feels like it's shouting back at you. Keene grins, almost childlike. Ah, yes. That's where we apply felt lining, thin, but dense enough to swallow reflection. The observer will hear only what comes through the tree, not from himself. It's remarkable work, really. You could call it the evolution of listening. DuPont chuckles. In this war, evolution seems to happen faster than time. Outside, thunder rolls, not from the sky, but from the artillery lines to the east. The ground shudders faintly underfoot. No one looks up. The noise has long ago become part of the rhythm of life. Later that afternoon, you accompany Keane and his team to the forward sector, where the new model will be tested. The trench walls are slick with rain, the duckboards half submerged. Somewhere above, a lark sings briefly before vanishing behind the thunder of a distant barrage. The prototype is heavy, far too heavy for stealth. It takes 6 men with pulleys to lower it into position under cover of dusk. The engineers whisper instructions, every movement rehearsed like clockwork. You and 2 others crawl forward to mark the exact spot where the old, shattered tree once stood. "Funny," one of them mutters. "Replacing a corpse with another corpse." The words linger. When the hollow steel trunk finally stands upright, it seems almost proud, like some strange metallic monument rising from the mud. Keane crouches beside you, tightening a final bolt. "If this works, we'll hear everything. Troop movement, repairs, even the enemy's guns setting their sights. Imagine it, a listening post invisible to all but the most suspicious eye." You nod, though a quiet unease stirs in you. You've been inside these things. You've felt the way the metal hums, the way the Earth's heartbeat travels through its walls. It's not just a machine. It's alive, in a way that feels unnatural. When the test begins, you climb inside again, familiar darkness, narrow walls, the faint smell of paint and oil. Only this time, there's something new, a deep, soft pulse that wasn't there before. The copper cones hum faintly, channeling sound from the outside world. You put your ear to the tube. At once, the battlefield comes alive. The scrape of boots, the rattle of helmets, even the flutter of paper as someone writes in the German trench, all of it reaches you, amplified and precise. You hear the low murmur of conversation, the shuffle of sandbags, the metallic cough of a rifle being checked. Then, suddenly, a new sound. A faint clink. Rhythmic. Deliberate. You frown, adjusting the listening tube. The pattern repeats. It's too even to be random. You recognize it after a few seconds, Morse code. The Germans are signaling. You can't decipher it all, but you catch fragments of rhythm. You scribble the sequence in your notebook, heart racing. Keane's voice crackles faintly through the internal speaking tube. "What do you hear?" "Morse," you whisper back. "Could be artillery coordination." A pause. "Good work. Stay on it." You listen until the tapping fades. When you finally emerge from the steel trunk, night has settled in. The trench glows faintly with the light of cigarettes and lanterns. Keane rushes forward, snatching the notebook from your hand, eyes darting across the page. This is extraordinary," he breathes. "They're signaling gun positions. We can counter before they strike." But DuPont isn't smiling. He stares toward the dark horizon, his paint-stained fingers gripping the trench wall. "They will not stay blind for long," he murmurs. "If we can hear them, they can hear us." The words send a chill through the air. You glance back once more at the steel tree, silent, black, perfect against the night sky. It no longer feels like an ally. It feels like something ancient and hungry, absorbing every whisper of the world. And for the first time, you wonder, if sound can travel in, could it someday travel out? The thought lingers as you drift to uneasy sleep, the faint hum of the steel tree echoing in your ears like a heartbeat that isn't yours. The front was unusually quiet that night. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp soil and faint smoke drifting from the burned-out remains of nearby farms. The men of Lieutenant Hale's unit sat in their dugout, sipping weak tea, trying to pretend the world beyond their trench didn't exist. But for Corporal Edwin Marks, the night was far from ordinary. Tonight, he was to occupy the new steel tree. The camouflage tree, as it was officially called, had been installed just 2 nights before. It looked, from a distance, like the charred skeleton of an old oak, its blackened limbs twisted against the moonlit sky. But inside, it was a marvel of engineering, narrow, hollow, lined with steel plating, and equipped with tiny slits just wide enough for binoculars and a periscope. "Remember," Hale had told Marks earlier that evening, his voice low but firm. "No sound. No light. If they see you move, they'll turn that tree into splinters with shellfire." Marks nodded. He'd been chosen because of his steady nerves and sharp eyesight. Still, as he approached the eerie metal trunk under the pale moon, his hands trembled. 2 engineers had helped dig the access tunnel beneath the front line. Now Marks crawled through it, inch by inch, the clay brushing against his uniform, until his head bumped against the inside of the hollow steel shell. He climbed the narrow ladder within, his boots scraping softly against the metal rungs. At the top, he pressed his eye to the observation slit. Beyond the fake bark, the German front line loomed in shadow, dim lanterns glimmered in the distance, and somewhere, faint laughter echoed. He felt completely alone. For hours, Marks watched. He noted movements, counted patrols, observed flashes of light that might have been signal lamps. He wrote down what he saw in a small notebook, though the pencil felt clumsy in his cold fingers. Occasionally, he could hear faint artillery far away, a low, rhythmic pulse that never seemed to stop. And then, just past midnight, he heard something new. It was a metallic clink, soft but distinct, coming from the direction of no man's land. He froze. Slowly, he turned the periscope. There, two shadowy figures crawling low to the ground. Germans. They were cutting through the wire. Mark's pulse quickened. He reached for his signal whistle, then hesitated. Blowing it would give away his position. Instead, he pressed a small switch inside the trunk, an electric line leading back to the British trench. A dim light blinked once, twice, 3 times, enemy movement spotted. Moments later, faint rustling reached his ears. British rifles cocked in the darkness. Then crack. A gunshot. Another. The night erupted into chaos. Flares burst overhead, painting the battlefield in harsh white light. The 2 Germans dropped where they were, motionless. Marx ducked instinctively as bullets began to whip through the air. The tree rattled from near hits, the metal shell echoing with each impact. Dirt sprayed against its sides like rain. For several minutes, he could do nothing but cling to the inner ladder, praying the illusion would hold, that the enemy wouldn't realize the tree was hollow. When the firing finally died down, he risked another glance. The flare light faded. The Germans had retreated. The front was silent again, except for the hiss of the wind. Marx let out a shaky breath. His uniform was damp with sweat. The rest of his watch passed uneventfully. When dawn's first light touched the misty horizon, he descended the ladder, crawled through the tunnel, and emerged back into the safety of the trench. His comrades greeted him with quiet admiration. Even Lieutenant Hale allowed himself a faint smile. "You did well, Corporal," he said. "You may have just saved us a nasty surprise." Marx nodded, too tired to speak. He sat on the edge of the trench, looking back toward the strange silhouette of the steel tree. In the early light, it looked almost beautiful, like a ghost of the old world, standing defiant amid the destruction. But Marx knew better. That tree wasn't alive. It was metal, cold and empty, built for one purpose only, to watch. And yet, as he drifted into an exhausted sleep, he couldn't shake the thought that, in its own silent way, the tree had come alive that night, witness to both death and deliverance. And somewhere deep inside its steel heart, the echo of gunfire still lingered. The morning after the skirmish dawned pale and silent, shrouded in a fog so thick it seemed to swallow the world. The trenches, the barbed wire, even the bodies of the land itself, all disappeared beneath a soft, endless gray. It was the kind of silence that made men whisper without knowing why, afraid that sound alone might disturb something ancient and unseen. Corporal Marx awoke to the muted sound of boots squelching through mud. His uniform was stiff with dried dirt, and his fingers ached from cold. He rubbed his eyes and looked around the trench. His comrades were little more than ghosts in the mist, their outlines blurred. The air smelled of earth, gunpowder, and the faint sweetness of damp wood. "Morning, Marx," came a voice from somewhere to his left. It was Sergeant Lyle, his broad shoulders barely visible. "You gave us a fine bit of warning last night." "Commands pleased." "The captain says you're to go back up tonight if the fog holds." Marx nodded slowly. "The tree again?" "Aye. You're its guardian now," Lyle said with a half-grin, then vanished into the mist. Marx sat there for a while, listening to the muffled world. The quiet was almost beautiful. After months of thunderous guns and screaming shells, this sudden gentleness felt unreal, like waking up in a dream. Somewhere above, birds tried to sing, their calls thin and hesitant, as if uncertain the world still existed. He looked toward the faint outline of the steel tree. Even now, through the fog, it seemed alive. Dew clung to its surface, making it glisten faintly, as though the trunk itself breathed. He knew it was just the illusion of light, but still, something about it stirred an unease deep in his chest. That afternoon, the men went about their duties in silence. They mended sandbags, checked rifles, and passed around a pot of weak coffee. The fog thickened, muffling every movement, every cough, every step. Once or twice, Marx thought he heard whispers drifting through it, soft, distant voices that could have been his comrades, or something else entirely. By dusk, even the horizon was gone. The world had become a closed sphere of white, and within it, the steel tree stood like a phantom. Lieutenant Hale approached Marx, his coat slick with moisture. "Visibility's perfect for you tonight," Hale said quietly. "No moon, no light. You'll see them long before they see you." Marx saluted, though the gesture felt unnecessary in the dense gloom. He slung his pack over his shoulder, checked his revolver, and climbed once more into the narrow tunnel. The air inside was colder than before, carrying the faint metallic tang of rust. When he reached the ladder, he paused, listening. There it was again, a faint whisper, just at the edge of hearing. It wasn't the wind, The fog outside was too still for that. It was more like the soft murmur of a distant conversation. He climbed. Inside the tree, it was pitch black. He adjusted the tiny slit in the bark and peered through. Nothing. The fog was a wall, unbroken and endless. He couldn't even see the German lines anymore, only swirling gray and, occasionally, the flicker of what might have been a lantern far, far away. For hours he sat in stillness. His mind drifted between wakefulness and dreams. Sometimes he thought he could hear the hum of the steel around him, like a low vibration. Sometimes he imagined footsteps passing just outside. Then, sometime after midnight, he heard the sound again, clearer this time. A whisper. It came from inside the tree. Mark stiffened. His breath caught. He pressed his back to the cold inner wall, every muscle tense. The whisper was faint, broken, as though carried through water. He strained to make out words. "They see us, not safe." He froze. The voice was unlike any he knew, either man nor woman, soft but echoing strangely, as if the steel itself was speaking. He wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but the words died in his throat. The whisper faded. Silence returned. Mark stayed still for a long time, his mind racing. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps the fog was playing tricks on his ears. He'd heard stories from the older soldiers, about how the battlefield itself seemed to talk on foggy nights. How sometimes, if he listened too closely, the ground would whisper back the voices of the fallen. He forced himself to breathe, to focus. Outside, the fog shifted slightly, parting for just a moment. Through his slit, he saw movement, dark figures, vague and slow, like shadows gliding through the mist. He reached for his periscope, but by the time he raised it, the shapes were gone. Hours passed. The fog thinned with the first light of dawn. Marks descended the ladder, feeling the weight of sleeplessness pressing on him. When he crawled back into the trench, Sergeant Lau was waiting, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "See anything?" Lyle asked. Marks hesitated. "Just shadows." Lyle nodded knowingly. "You'll see plenty of those out here." As Marks turned to leave, he glanced once more toward the steel tree. The dew glistened on its bark again, but now he could see faint streaks across the surface. Thin, dark lines that hadn't been there before. Almost like fingerprints pressed into the metal. He blinked, and they were gone. The fog, the whispers, the shapes, perhaps they were nothing. But as he lay down to rest, the memory of that voice lingered, echoing faintly in his mind. "They see us, not safe." And for the first time since the war began, Corporal Marks wished the fog would never lift. The fog lingered for days. It rolled over the front like a tide, soft and merciless, blurring every outline of the world. The soldiers moved through it like shades of themselves, quiet, uncertain, their voices muffled as though spoken through cloth. The war, for a moment, seemed to pause. Yet beneath that silence, something restless stirred. Corporal Marks hadn't told anyone about the whisper. It sounded absurd when he tried to imagine how he'd even begin to explain it. "The tree spoke to me." What officer would believe that? But each night since. As he lay on his cot in the damp dugout, he could still hear that faint voice echoing in the back of his mind. Sometimes it seemed to merge with the sounds of the earth, the faint dripping of water, the rumble of artillery far away, the sigh of shifting soil. It was as if the whole front was breathing. By the third day, the trench walls had begun to crumble under the weight of the constant moisture. Men worked with shovels and boards to reinforce them. Marks was among them, his thoughts elsewhere. Every now and then, his gaze drifted to the outline of the steel tree, barely visible through the fog. Lieutenant Hale appeared beside him, his coat soaked, his face lined with exhaustion. "You've been quiet lately, Marks," he said, his tone light but probing. "Yes, sir," Marks replied, pressing another sandbag into place. "You've seen more of that damn thing than anyone," Hale continued. "Any trouble with it?" "The engineers say it's holding up well." Marks hesitated. "It's fine, sir. Just strange being out there alone." Hale nodded slowly, as if he understood. "That tree's an eye and an ear for us. But don't let it get in your head. Remember what it is, steel and bolts. Nothing more." "Yes, sir." But Marks wasn't sure. That evening, as he rested with a mug of tepid tea, a runner arrived with orders. Hale read them quickly, his expression tightening. "They're planning a raid," he said to the men around him. "We need a full survey of the German line before midnight. Marks, you'll take the tree again." The words fell like a weight in Marks's chest. He nodded without argument. By nightfall, he was back inside the narrow tunnel, crawling toward the hollow trunk. The earth smelled of rot and metal. The deeper he went, the more the tunnel seemed to hum with a faint vibration, almost like distant machinery, or a pulse. When he reached the ladder, he paused, placing a hand on the cold inner wall. The steel was trembling ever so slightly. He climbed. Inside, It was utterly dark. He adjusted the viewing slit, and once again, the battlefield stretched before him, silent, misty, unreal. He began his routine, scanning, noting, counting faint glimmers of lantern light along the German trench. For a long time, nothing moved. Then, near midnight, he heard something new. Not outside. Beneath him. It started as a low thud, rhythmic and deliberate. Then another. And another. Someone, or something, was digging. Marx froze, pressing his ear to the inner wall. The sound was faint but steady, coming from somewhere deep underground, directly beneath the no man's land. British engineers, perhaps? But they hadn't reported any tunneling this close. The realization came slowly and cold. The Germans must be mining toward them. He reached for the signal switch, but as he did, the whisper returned. Not beneath the roots. The words were clearer now, vibrating through the steel. He jerked his hand back instinctively, his heart pounding. Who's there? He whispered aloud, though he knew no one could hear. No answer. Only the faint echo of that same digging, steady as a heartbeat. He sat frozen for several minutes, unsure what to do. Then the sound stopped. Just stopped, clean, sudden, absolute. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. He forced himself to act, flipping the small electric switch 3 times. Back in the British trench, the coded signal would alert command, possible underground activity. Then he waited, straining his ears, every nerve alive. After an hour, faint footsteps sounded in the tunnel below. 2 engineers emerged, their lamps flickering. One of them, a young sapper with soot on his cheeks, looked up the ladder. Corporal Marx? Here, Marx whispered down. Got your signal. You said you heard digging? Yes. From below. Maybe 40 feet down. The sapper frowned. We'll check it. Stay put. For the next half hour, the sounds of the engineers' shovels echoed faintly. Marx kept watch, but his focus drifted to the wall again. His fingers brushed the inner metal, and this time, it was warm. Not just from his touch. The steel itself seemed to pulse with a faint inner heat. He drew his hand back sharply. When the engineers returned, their expressions were grim. You were right, one said. They're tunneling under no man's land, trying to plant charges. We'll send word up the line. As they vanished back into the tunnel, Marx remained inside the tree, alone once more. The fog outside began to shift with the approach of dawn. He took one last look through the slit. The battlefield was still. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath. He reached up to touch the wall again, cold now, silent, and whispered to it. What are you? No answer came. But deep beneath his boots, far below the trenches and tunnels, the ground gave a faint tremor, like a sigh from something ancient and buried. And Corporal Marx knew that the whisper wasn't done with him yet. The morning after the discovery of the underground digging brought no relief. Fog still clung to the trenches, though thinner now, swirling like ghostly fingers across the mud and duckboards. The distant hum of artillery seemed softened, muffled, as though the world itself had exhaled overnight. Corporal Marx moved through the trench with deliberate slowness, boots sinking in the soft, wet earth. He carried only a small pack, a notebook, and a pencil. His thoughts lingered on the tree, hollow and cold, waiting for him on the front line. Something about it now felt almost alive, not in the mechanical sense of its design, but in the way it responded to the world. The men around him moved quietly, shadows against the fog. Occasionally, someone would murmur a greeting, and the sound would vanish before it reached the next step. Even Sergeant Lyle's usual booming voice seemed subdued, absorbed by the soft mist. By afternoon, the orders came. The Germans had not paused in their mining. Marx was to take his observation post once again, climb into the steel tree, and report any activity. The walk to the site was surreal. The fog blurred everything, the shattered trees, the broken barbed wire, the deep craters that scarred the earth. It felt as though he were moving through a world half-remembered, like stepping into a painting left unfinished. He crouched near the base of the hollow tree, brushing mud from his uniform. The steel surface glistened faintly in the diffused light. The engineers had checked it earlier. They had ensured the viewing slits were clear, the acoustic tubes unobstructed. But Marx knew that the tree was more than metal. He could feel it, somehow, a presence in the stillness, a patient watcher. He climbed the ladder and entered the familiar hollow. Darkness embraced him immediately. The smell of cold steel and faint oil filled his nose. He adjusted the viewing slit, peering out into the pale landscape. The fog stretched endlessly. For a moment, there was nothing, no movement, no light, no sound beyond the occasional drip of water from a damaged parapet. Then he noticed something subtle, shadows. Not the ordinary shadows cast by craters or ruined timber, but faint, shifting shapes that seemed to move with a life of their own. At first, he thought it was a trick of the fog or the angle of the moon. But as he watched, the shadows shifted deliberately, almost cautiously, as though observing him in return. Marx leaned closer to the slit, straining his eyes. The German trench line was indistinct, but the movement suggested more than ordinary soldiers. Figures crouched, waiting, shifting behind the cover of fog. He could see the faint glimmer of helmet edges, the shimmer of bayonets, but the shadows seemed larger, stretching unnaturally. He exhaled slowly. The fog was a veil, a soft curtain that both hid and revealed. Every sound outside was amplified in the steel trunk. The faint rustle of earth, the whisper of wind through broken branches, the distant crack of a rifle, all of it converged into a symphony of tension. Marx pressed his hand to the steel wall. It vibrated faintly beneath his fingers, a low hum that resonated through his body. He could almost feel the heartbeat of the tree, synchronized with the pulse of the battlefield. The whispers of the fog seemed to merge with the hum, as if the metal itself carried secrets from the earth below. Hours passed. He recorded the positions, the faint signals, the shifting shadows. Every movement outside was a clue, every whisper a warning. And yet, there was a strange serenity in the observation. The fog softened the edges of the world, turning destruction into a muted, almost dreamlike scene. At one point, Marx caught sight of a small figure moving unnaturally among the craters, a man or something resembling a man, blurred by the mist. It paused, then crouched, and he swore it seemed to watch the tree. His heart skipped, but he stayed still. The figure vanished, absorbed into the fog. The night deepened, bringing an almost sacred quiet. Marx felt the rhythm of the world outside slow, the soft breathing of men, the distant rumble of artillery, the gentle sway of the hollow tree. For a moment, he felt connected, not just to the post, but to the earth itself. Every sound, every shadow, every vibration seemed to speak to him, telling stories of survival, vigilance, and quiet resilience. As dawn approached, the fog began to lift. Light crept slowly across the trenches, revealing shapes long hidden. Marx descended the ladder, stiff and exhausted, carrying the weight of another night of observation. Outside, the trench was wet and silent. Shadows had returned to normal. The steel tree stood in mute witness, its hollow trunk gleaming faintly. Marx knew he would climb back into it many times before the war ended. But in that stillness, he realized something profound. The fog, the shadows, the whispers, all were part of the story the battlefield told. And the steel tree, hollow yet alive, was the place where those stories converged, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. Marx walked back through the trench, boots sinking in mud, heart still attuned to the faint hum beneath his fingers. The fog swirled around him, soft and indifferent, carrying with it the echoes of the night and the whispering of steel. The trench had grown almost unnaturally quiet. Days of fog, rain, and endless mud had worn the men thin. Even the usual groans and complaints seemed muted, absorbed by the sodden earth. Corporal Marx moved among them like a ghost, carrying his notebook and pencil with quiet determination. Each time he passed the hollow steel tree, it seemed to watch him back, an unmoving sentinel with secrets buried in its metal core. Lieutenant Hale approached as Marx was checking a line of duckboards. His coat was streaked with mud, and his face was pale from lack of sleep. "Another night," he said softly. "The engineers need to make a minor adjustment. They think the acoustic tubes are too sensitive now, picking up everything, even our own voices." Marx nodded, though he felt a strange pride. The tree had been listening for days, capturing the rhythm of the battlefield, the whispers of the fog, the subtle footfalls in the mud. He knew that every minute inside it was both observation and meditation, a silent communion with the land of war. By evening, Marx prepared once again for his post. The fog had lifted slightly, leaving the trench edges shrouded in mist, but no longer opaque. Shadows stretched and swayed under the pale moonlight, transforming the broken landscape into a surreal theater. He approached the steel tree with care, almost reverence. The interior was familiar now. The faint metallic scent, the cold walls, the ladder worn by countless climbs, all seemed like an extension of himself. He climbed in slowly, settling into the narrow space. The silence inside was profound, deeper than any night he had spent on watch. It was as though the world had condensed into a single point, the slit in the trunk, through which he could observe, yet not be observed. Hours passed. Outside, small figures moved cautiously, the German patrols unaware of the steel eye watching them. Marx recorded every movement, every flicker of light. He noticed patterns forming, how the patrols shifted, how they signaled, how the fog altered their perception. Then, from the corner of his vision, he thought he saw movement in the shadows beyond the trench line. Not the soldiers. Something else. Still. Waiting. He turned the periscope slowly, eyes scanning. Nothing. The fog had thickened again, softening the outlines of the earth, but the unease lingered. He pressed his hand against the inner wall of the tree. There it was again, the faint pulse, almost imperceptible, like a slow heartbeat. Not from him. not from any living creature he knew. The tree itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation, as if aware that he was watching, waiting, listening. Time stretched. The night grew longer. Marks could hear the distant rumble of artillery, the faint shuffle of boots, the soft murmur of soldiers talking in hushed tones. But all of it felt secondary to the subtle rhythm within the steel. The tree amplified it, transforming mundane sounds into a symphony of tension and life. Suddenly, a faint tapping reached his ear. Slow, deliberate, patterned. He leaned closer. It came from beyond the trench. No, below it, far beneath the mud. The Germans were mining again, trying to tunnel under the lines, just as before. Marks noted it carefully, recording the time, the pattern, and the direction. Hours later, the tapping stopped. The fog had thickened to the point that even the nearest enemy trench was obscured. Mark stayed in the hollow tree, listening to the silence, attuned to the vibration beneath his fingers. The world outside had become a dreamscape, shadows, fog, and echoes of a war that never seemed to sleep. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Marks descended slowly. He emerged from the hollow tree, blinking against the weak morning light. The trench seemed unchanged, ordinary, almost peaceful compared to the night. But he knew better. The steel tree stood silently in its place, a sentinel and a witness. Inside its hollow trunk, it had held the whispers of the battlefield, the secrets of the earth, and the faint pulse of life and death. It had listened, waited, and survived, unmoving, patient, eternal. Marks walked back along the trench, each step heavy yet measured. The fog had lifted, revealing the scarred landscape in pale clarity. Every crater, every broken branch, every splintered plank carried the memory of the night. He glanced back once more at the steel tree. In that brief moment, it seemed to shimmer faintly in the morning light, almost as if acknowledging him. And for the first time, he understood the paradox of the silent watchers. They saw everything, yet revealed nothing. They listened endlessly, yet spoke only when necessary. The hollow steel tree was not merely a machine. It was a guardian, a historian, a witness to a war that would otherwise leave its stories untold. Marks returned to his cot in the dugout, exhausted but alert. He knew he would climb into the tree again. He knew the fog would return, the shadows would shift, and the whispers would resume. And he knew, deep down, that the steel sentinel would be waiting, silent, patient, alive in its own mysterious way. The evening descended slowly over the trenches, carrying with it the familiar chill and dampness. Corporal Marks adjusted his coat, his eyes tracing the edge of the horizon where the first stars began to glimmer faintly through a thin veil of clouds. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke from distant fires, a scent he had come to associate with both vigilance and unease. Tonight, he was to occupy the steel tree again. The engineers had reinforced the ladder and polished the interior slits. Marks approached it cautiously, his boots sinking slightly in the muddy earth. Even after weeks of service, the sight of the hollow tree sent a shiver through him, an odd mixture of respect, fear, and curiosity. Climbing inside, he felt the familiar cold steel embrace him. The faint hum of metal reverberated under his fingertips. He settled into the narrow chamber and peered through the slit. The battlefield stretched before him, pale and muted under the silver light of the rising moon. Shadows clung to the edges of craters and the twisted remnants of trees. Hours passed in stillness. Marks watched, took notes, and listened to the subtle rhythms of the night. Every shift of fog, every distant movement, every whisper of wind was catalogued meticulously. The steel tree amplified these sounds, turning faint rustles into audible warnings and distant groans into signals. Then, at the midpoint of his watch, he noticed something unusual. A flicker of light far across no man's land, brief, almost imperceptible, like a firefly darting in the mist. He adjusted his periscope, squinting. The movement repeated, this time with a rhythm. Marks recognized it instantly, coded signals, likely a form of communication between enemy posts. He began to trace the pattern, noting the intervals and duration. Each flicker was precise, deliberate. It told a story if one knew how to read it. Mark's pulse quickened. This was intelligence, a chance to anticipate movements, perhaps prevent a disaster. The tree's hollow trunk seemed to amplify the significance of what he saw, making him feel as if the entire night held its breath alongside him. The fog shifted, curling around craters and debris, masking his presence. Mark stayed perfectly still, recording the signals in his notebook. The distant tapping of boots, the rustle of cloth, the faint groan of mud under weight, all became part of a larger composition. He felt almost like a conductor, orchestrating observations, notes, and movements into understanding. Suddenly, the flickering signals stopped. The silence that followed was profound, almost unnerving. Marks pressed his ear to the steel wall, listening. Nothing moved except the subtle vibration of the earth, the whisper of wind through broken branches, and the distant, muffled sound of artillery far away. The absence of signals was a message in itself, and he recorded the time carefully. Hours drifted on. Marks became aware of the slow, steady pulse of the tree beneath him, a heartbeat of metal and intention. It was as if the steel had absorbed the rhythm of the battlefield, turning it into a quiet companion, a silent observer. He allowed himself a deep, measured breath, letting the awareness of both danger and serenity fill him. Then, as dawn began to lighten the horizon, faint shapes moved along the enemy lines, figures shifting in the soft, diffused light, perhaps reacting to his observations or the signals they believed to be secret. Marks recorded the patterns meticulously, knowing that his notes might save lives later. Descending the ladder, he felt the weight of the night's observations pressing on him. The steel tree, hollow yet perceptive, stood silently behind him, a sentinel whose presence he had begun to regard almost like a living entity. The faint hum seemed to linger as he stepped back into the trench. Lieutenant Hale was already there, his gaze fixed on Marks. "Signals observed?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir. Pattern, duration, intervals, all recorded," Marks replied, his voice calm but firm. Hale nodded. "Good work. The men in the forward posts will adjust their movements. Your watch may have prevented an ambush tonight." Marks allowed himself a moment to look back at the steel tree. In the morning light, its hollow trunk seemed less menacing, almost dignified. Yet he knew that come evening, when the fog returned and the battlefield fell back into shadow, he would climb inside again. He would become part of its silent observation, a guardian of its secrets, a witness to the rhythms of war whispered through steel and mist. As he lay down later in the dugout, exhausted yet alert, he could still feel the pulse of the tree echoing in his mind. Every flicker of light, every faint shadow, every whispered sound had become part of him. He closed his eyes and drifted into a cautious, deep sleep, carrying with him the quiet vigilance of the hollow steel sentinel and the whispered secrets of the battlefield. The night fell with a softness that made the battlefield almost unrecognizable. The craters and trenches, scarred by months of relentless artillery, seemed muted beneath the veil of darkness and drifting mist. For Corporal Marks, the walk to the hollow steel tree was both familiar and strange. Every step through the mud felt heavier tonight, as though the earth itself was aware of his purpose and weighing him down with anticipation. He approached the tree cautiously. Its silhouette loomed like a silent guardian against the foggy horizon. Even after weeks of service, the hollow steel trunk carried an aura that was difficult to articulate, a combination of purpose, silence, and an almost imperceptible intelligence. Marks placed his hand on the cold surface, feeling the faint vibrations that had become so familiar. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, a rhythm he had begun to synchronize with. Climbing the ladder into the narrow hollow, he entered the familiar dark. Inside, the metal walls enclosed him, absorbing the sounds of the night. He adjusted the viewing slit and scanned the landscape. The fog had thickened again, curling around broken trees, barbed wire, and jagged craters. Shadows moved just beyond the edge of sight, their shapes shifting and blending with the mist. Marks felt that familiar twinge of awareness, the feeling that even while he watched, something unseen was watching him in return. Hours passed in quiet vigilance. Marks focused on the distant lines, tracing faint movements, noting the position of German patrols, listening to every subtle sound. The fog softened the edges of reality, turning destruction into a dreamlike panorama. Each detail seemed amplified within the hollow steel, every whisper of the wind or shift of mud carrying weight. Then, faintly, he heard a signal unlike any before. Not light this time, but sound, a tapping, precise and deliberate, coming from a distant, shadowed section of the battlefield. Marks recognized it immediately, a coded message, possibly sent between enemy posts. He listened intently, noting the rhythm, the intervals, and the subtle variations. Each beat of the tapping was a piece of information, a fragment of intelligence hidden in the night. The hollow tree seemed to resonate with the signal. Marks pressed his hand against the cold steel, feeling the faint hum turn into a subtle vibration, almost like a shared understanding between him and the sentinel. The tree had patience, a silent endurance that outlasted fatigue, fear, and the relentless passage of time. Marks realized that his own patience, his ability to observe and wait, was being tested in the same way. Hours slipped by. Mark's eyes grew heavy, but he did not allow himself to relax fully. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, every faint glimmer of light required attention. Occasionally, the vibration in the steel would change subtly, alerting him to movements in areas he could not see. He began to trust the tree's guidance, letting the sensations of metal and mist inform his observations. Near midnight, the tapping stopped. Marks exhaled slowly, aware of the profound silence that followed. The fog drifted in slow, curling tendrils, and he could sense the faint rhythm of distant artillery, the soft shuffle of soldiers in the trench below, and the whisper of the earth itself. It was a symphony of subtlety, a world compressed into whispers and vibrations. Dawn approached, pale and hesitant. Marks climbed down the ladder. his limbs stiff but his mind alert. The steel tree stood silently behind him, its hollow trunk gleaming faintly in the first light. It had been a patient watcher through the night, absorbing the rhythm of the battlefield, the signals of the enemy, and the quiet endurance of its human guardian. Lieutenant Hale met him at the trench. "Did you catch anything tonight?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir," Marks replied. "Signals, movements, patterns. The enemy is cautious, but predictable if watched carefully." Hale nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and respect. "Good. Your patience in that tree may have saved lives tonight." Marks allowed himself a moment to look back at the hollow sentinel. Its presence was almost reverent in the soft morning light. Though it was steel and bolts, it had become something more, a guardian, a historian, and a quiet witness to the war's unending rhythm. As he walked back through the trench, the fog lifting around him, Marks understood that the steel tree's greatest gift was patience. It taught endurance, observation, and the quiet power of waiting. Every night spent inside it was a lesson in vigilance, a meditation on the fragile balance between life, death, and the subtle signals of the world. Later, lying on his cot in the dugout, Marks felt the echo of the tree's presence linger in his mind. Its silent patience had seeped into him, shaping his awareness, tuning his senses, and sharpening his understanding of the battlefield. As he drifted into a careful, deep sleep, he carried with him the quiet knowledge that some watchers are eternal, some sentinels are patient, and that the night, with all its whispers and shadows, always has a story to tell. The fog returned that evening like a living thing, thick and unyielding, swallowing the trenches and craters in its soft gray embrace. The world beyond the front lines became a blur of shapes and shadows, each movement uncertain, each sound amplified and distorted. Corporal Marks adjusted his coat, his boots sinking slightly in the mud as he approached the hollow steel tree. The air was heavy with moisture, carrying the faint smell of wet earth, gunpowder, and something indefinable, an almost metallic tang that seemed to belong to the battlefield itself. Marks paused at the base of the tree, placing his hand on its cold, smooth surface. The faint vibration beneath his fingers was familiar, reassuring. The tree waited patiently, hollow yet alive, a sentinel that had become his companion over countless nights. He climbed the ladder slowly, the interior darkness enveloping him as he settled into the narrow chamber. The steel walls absorbed the world outside, turning muffled footsteps, whispered conversations, and distant artillery into a symphony of subtle signals. Through the viewing slit, the battlefield looked transformed. The fog softened the harsh edges of destruction, turning shattered trees, craters, and broken barbed wire into muted shapes that seemed almost dreamlike. Marks could see only faint outlines of German patrols, their movements cautious and measured. The fog distorted everything, yet paradoxically, it made observation more precise. Patterns emerged in the blur, rhythms of life and survival that he had learned to read. Hours passed in quiet vigilance. Marks recorded every detail, noting the positions of enemy movements, the faint glimmer of lanterns, the subtle changes in shadow. Then, almost imperceptibly, he realized the fog itself seemed to respond to him. It drifted differently around the craters, curling in soft eddies, lingering over certain areas, as if it had its own awareness. The whispers of wind through broken branches and the distant hum of artillery melded with this living veil, creating an almost conscious presence. The hollow steel tree amplified the subtle symphony. Marks pressed his hand to the metal walls and felt the faint vibration of the battlefield, the pulse of life and death beneath the earth. He realized that the tree did more than observe, it listened, translating the soft language of the fog, shadows, and distant footsteps into signals that he could understand. The world had become a quiet dialogue, and he was part of it. A participant in a conversation of whispers and silences. Suddenly, a faint light appeared through the mist. It was brief, almost imperceptible, like the blink of a distant star. Marks adjusted the periscope and focused. Another light flickered, then another. He recognized the pattern immediately, signals sent between enemy positions. Each blink was deliberate, measured, conveying information he could decipher if he paid attention. He recorded the times, intervals, and sequences meticulously. The fog seemed to absorb and magnify the signals, carrying them to him with uncanny clarity. Hours continued to pass. Marks became acutely aware of the rhythm of the battlefield, the soft shuffle of soldiers, the occasional rustle of equipment, the distant groan of mud under weight. The fog accentuated every sound, every movement, turning them into part of a larger, intricate pattern. The hollow steel tree hummed faintly beneath his fingers, as if approving, guiding, amplifying his perception. As the night deepened, Mark sensed another presence. It was not human, nor mechanical. It was the fog itself, drifting closer, curling around the steel tree, pressing softly against its hollow walls. He felt it as a vibration in the metal, a gentle, persistent awareness. The fog listened. It carried the stories of the battlefield, the whispers of men and earth, the pulse of the night. And now, through the tree, Marks was listening too. By the time dawn crept slowly over the horizon, the fog had thinned slightly, revealing the broken landscape in soft relief. Marks descended from the hollow tree, stiff but alert, carrying with him another night of observations. The signals, the vibrations, the subtle language of fog and metal, all had been recorded. The tree stood silently behind him, patient and steadfast, a guardian and interpreter of the night. Lieutenant Hale met him in the trench. "Observations?" he asked quietly, glancing at Mark's notebook. "Complete," Marks replied. "The fog carried messages, patterns I could read. The enemy is cautious, but their movements are consistent." Hale nodded, impressed. "Good. That vigilance may save lives again." Marks looked back at the steel tree. Its hollow trunk gleamed faintly in the pale morning light, silent, patient, and ever watchful. The fog had listened, the steel had amplified, and he had been part of the conversation. He understood something profound. In this world of chaos, destruction, and uncertainty, patience, observation, and subtle awareness were as vital as courage. Later, lying in his cot in the dugout, Marks felt the echo of the night linger in his mind. The hollow tree, the fog, the signals, all had become intertwined with his senses. Sleep came slowly, cautiously, as the whispers of the night and the patient hum of the sentinel resonated in his dreams. He knew he would return, climb into the steel tree again, and continue to listen, to watch, to learn from the silent guardians of the battlefield. The trench was quiet that evening, but the earth itself seemed restless. Corporal Marks felt it under his boots, a subtle vibration traveling through the mud, a reminder that life, and death, had its own rhythms beneath the surface. The rain had softened the soil, filling craters with shallow pools that reflected the dim light of the rising moon. He approached the hollow steel tree with careful steps, aware of the faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to emanate from the battlefield itself. Climbing the ladder into the tree, Marks felt the familiar embrace of the cold metal. The interior smelled faintly of oil and rain, a scent he had come to associate with both vigilance and solitude. Settling into the narrow chamber, he adjusted the viewing slit and peered into the mist-laden battlefield. Shadows shifted in the fog, distorting broken timber, barbed wire, and craters into eerie, fluid shapes. Tonight, the world beyond the steel wall seemed both familiar and alien, as though reality had been suspended in a delicate balance. Hours passed. Marks watched, listened, and recorded every movement. Then, faintly, he noticed something unusual, vibrations that didn't come from above ground. Slow, deliberate tremors, subtle enough to be missed if one wasn't listening with intent. He pressed his hand to the steel wall, feeling the faint resonance travel through his fingers. Something moved beneath the mud, tunnels, miners, perhaps, or secret preparations that the enemy hoped would remain unseen. He focused intently, sketching patterns in his notebook, timing each tremor. The hollow steel tree seemed to amplify these minute signals, translating the almost imperceptible shifts in the earth into something he could comprehend. Each pulse spoke of unseen labor, of preparation, of careful planning. Marks realized that while above-ground activity was visible and expected, the real story often unfolded silently beneath the surface. Through the viewing slit, he scanned the foggy battlefield, noting the faint glimmer of patrol lanterns and the shifting silhouettes of enemy soldiers. Yet his attention remained drawn to the subtle vibrations, the whispers beneath the mud. The hollow steel tree became more than an observation post. It was a translator, a sentinel for hidden activity, converting the Earth's secret language into signals he could record and interpret. Time slipped by almost unnoticed. The night deepened, and with it, the intensity of observation grew. Marks noticed patterns emerging in the underground vibrations, subtle sequences that suggested mining activity or movement of supplies. Each tremor, when combined with above-ground signals, created a map of enemy intent, a story told in whispers and vibrations rather than shouts and footsteps. At one point, a faint crack reached his ear, followed by a soft shift in the vibrations beneath the mud. Marks leaned closer to the steel wall, straining to interpret the sequence. It was a rhythm, deliberate, precise, and almost mechanical. The enemy was tunneling, slowly and carefully, perhaps to undermine the front line or set charges. Marks recorded every detail, knowing that this knowledge could prevent disaster. The fog thickened, curling around the craters and shattered timber, muting the sounds above ground. Yet the vibrations beneath became clearer, almost speaking to him. Marks realized that the battlefield had layers, visible and invisible, audible and subtle, and that the hollow steel tree allowed him to perceive both. He felt an odd connection to the earth, as if he were listening not just to the enemy, but to the land itself, understanding its whispers and warnings. By dawn, the vibrations had ceased, or at least faded to imperceptible levels. Marks descended the ladder, stiff but alert, carrying with him another night of observations. The hollow steel tree stood silently behind him, its cold surface reflecting the first light of morning. It had been patient, listening to the echoes beneath the mud, transforming them into intelligence, guidance, and insight. Lieutenant Hale met him in the trench, his expression a mix of curiosity and respect. "Anything unusual?" he asked softly. Marks nodded. "Underground activity. The enemy is preparing something, but it's slow, methodical. I've mapped the vibrations, their timing, and sequence." Hale glanced at the notebook, impressed. "Good work. That may save lives and give us the upper hand." Marks allowed himself a long look back at the steel tree. Its hollow trunk had become more than metal. It was a guardian, a translator, a patient witness to the hidden rhythms of war. As he walked back along the trench, he felt the weight and importance of vigilance, the subtle power of patience, and the uncanny ability to listen not just to what was visible, but to what whispered beneath the surface. Later, lying on his cot in the dugout, Marks could still feel the faint vibration of the steel tree in his mind. Sleep came slowly, entwined with the echoes of the battlefield beneath the mud and the silent presence of the hollow sentinel. He knew he would return, climb inside again, and continue to listen, because the earth itself had stories yet untold, and the steel tree was the only way to hear them fully. The evening fog rolled across the battlefield once again, thick and unyielding, softening the jagged edges of craters and trenches, wrapping everything in a damp, ghostly haze. Corporal Marks approached the hollow steel tree with a quiet reverence. Its silhouette, dark against the fading light, stood like a sentinel that had absorbed countless secrets over nights of endless vigilance. Tonight, he would return to its hollow chamber, to listen, observe, and decipher the faintest whispers of the war around him. Climbing into the tree, Marks felt the familiar chill of the metal walls. The narrow interior, so confining yet protective, seemed almost alive, resonating with the faint vibrations of the battlefield. Settling into his position, he adjusted the viewing slit and peered through it. The fog stretched across the earth like a living curtain, concealing movements while revealing patterns that only patience could uncover. Hours passed in near silence. Marks recorded every subtle detail, the distant shuffle of boots, the soft hiss of wind through broken timbers, the muted groan of artillery far off. Each sound was amplified by the steel, creating an almost musical rhythm that allowed him to sense patterns and chaos. Through the slit, the world became both visible and hidden, and every flicker of movement told a story. Then came the whispers. Not human voices, not clearly audible, but faint sounds that carried through the metal walls, a subtle shifting of cloth, the soft scrape of equipment, the occasional metallic echo from distant trenches. Marks recognized them as signals, faint and deliberate, probably messages between enemy posts. He began to note each sequence, recording the pauses, repetitions, and variations. The hollow steel tree seemed to respond. The vibrations beneath his hands shifted slightly, as if guiding him to notice details that the eyes alone could not catch. Marks pressed his hand to the metal and felt the subtle hum resonate with the faint whispers from outside. He realized that the tree was more than a passive observation post. It was a translator, a listener that amplified the world's hidden sounds, converting chaos into discernible patterns. Hours melted away as he traced the whispers. The fog warped light and shadow, making distant figures appear closer or farther than they were, yet the signals persisted with consistency. Marks recorded the times, duration, and sequence of every movement and sound, realizing that these whispers carried intentions, movements, shifts, and decisions made silently under the cover of night. The silence between signals was as important as the signals themselves. Marks learned to interpret the gaps, the pauses where nothing happened, yet where meaning was encoded. The battlefield was speaking in a language of subtleties, and the hollow steel tree allowed him to understand it in ways the untrained ear never could. Suddenly, a soft tapping reached him, distinct from the earlier whispers. It came from a section of the battlefield obscured by fog, far beyond the trench lines. Marks leaned closer, straining to interpret the rhythm. It was a signal, but unlike the predictable messages he had seen before. The tapping was irregular, almost cautious, as though the sender were testing the limits of their own concealment. He recorded it meticulously, noting the intervals, patterns, and pauses. The steel tree hummed faintly, a vibration that seemed to acknowledge the significance of the observation. Marks realized that these whispers through the slits were a language of survival, intelligence, and anticipation. They revealed movements, preparations, and strategies without a single word being spoken aloud. The night deepened further. Marks felt a connection between himself, the hollow steel tree, and the battlefield. The fog, the whispers, the vibrations, they were all layers of a hidden conversation. The tree amplified the subtlety of the world, allowing him to participate in the silent dialogue, to perceive intentions hidden beneath the apparent chaos. By dawn, the whispers had faded with the light, leaving only the soft hum of the morning and the distant murmur of soldiers beginning their routines. Marks descended the ladder, muscles stiff, mind alert, carrying with him a notebook full of observations and patterns. The hollow tree stood silently behind him, as patient and unmoving as ever, a sentinel that had transformed observation into understanding. Lieutenant Hale awaited him. "Anything new tonight?" he asked quietly. Marks nodded. "Signals through the slits. Patterns we haven't seen before. They're testing movements, but predictable if we watch carefully." Hale's expression softened in appreciation. "Good. Your vigilance continues to give us the advantage." Marks glanced back at the steel tree. Its hollow trunk glinted faintly in the early morning light, silent, patient, and eternal. He understood, more deeply than ever, that the tree was not just metal. It was a witness, a translator, and a companion in the shadows of war. And as he returned to the dugout, he carried the lesson of patience, observation, and the quiet power of listening through the whispers of the night. Night descended over the battlefield with a hush that seemed almost unnatural. The craters and trenches, scarred by relentless artillery, were softened beneath the drifting fog, and the muted moonlight cast long, spectral shadows across the landscape. Corporal Marks moved quietly toward the hollow steel tree, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Each step felt heavier tonight, weighted by anticipation and the knowledge that what he was about to witness might be different from any other night. The hollow steel tree loomed in the fog, dark and silent, yet strangely alive. Marks placed a hand against its cold surface and felt the faint hum that had become so familiar. It resonated softly, like a heartbeat of metal, subtle yet persistent. Climbing into the narrow chamber, he settled into his position and adjusted the viewing slit. The tree enclosed him completely, isolating him from the biting wind and the restless earth, yet amplifying every subtle movement in the world outside. Hours passed in quiet observation. Marks tracked distant patrols, the faint flicker of lanterns, the shiver of fog over craters. Then, almost imperceptibly, he noticed something he had never seen before, movement that was deliberate, calculated, yet impossible to locate precisely. It seemed as if the battlefield itself had eyes, hidden and omnipresent, watching and waiting. Mark squinted through the slit, his senses heightened, noting every subtle shift of shadow and light. The steel tree amplified the faint signals of the enemy. Tiny disturbances in the fog, minute vibrations in the earth, subtle changes in the rhythm of distant footsteps. They all hinted at observation beyond what any patrol could achieve. Marks realized that the enemy, too, relied on hidden eyes, just as he did. And the hollow tree, in its silent, patient manner, allowed him to compete with those eyes, to anticipate movements, and to interpret intentions. Time passed slowly, the rhythm of the night pressing on him. Every rustle of clothing, every faint creak of wood, every whisper of wind became part of a larger symphony. Marks recorded everything meticulously, aware that each detail might carry strategic importance. The fog made direct observation difficult, yet the signals hidden within movement and vibration revealed a layered world, rich with information for those who could perceive it. Suddenly, a subtle shift caught his attention. A dark silhouette moved in the fog, yet its pattern was different from the predictable patrols. It paused, scanning the terrain, then moved again with calculated precision. Marks noted the timing, the pauses, the path. The enemy had hidden observers, and now, for the first time, he felt the thrill and fear of truly being watched in a game of patience and stealth. He pressed his hand to the cold metal of the tree. The vibration resonated faintly, a silent acknowledgement of his perception. The hollow tree was more than an observation post. It was a partner, translating the hidden language of the battlefield into patterns he could understand. Every hidden eye, every unseen signal, every subtle movement became part of a conversation that only he and the steel sentinel could fully interpret. The night deepened further, and the enemy observers retreated, leaving behind a faint residue of movement in the fog. Marks recorded everything, the paths, the timings, the hidden patterns. The battlefield, though scarred and silent, had spoken to him, and the hollow tree had amplified its message, turning whispers and shadows into actionable intelligence. Dawn approached slowly, pale and diffused, brushing the fog away and revealing the ruined landscape in muted clarity. Marks climbed down the ladder, stiff but alert, notebook filled with the night's discoveries. The steel tree stood silently behind him, a patient guardian, a translator of the hidden language of war. Lieutenant Hale waited in the trench. "Reports?" he asked. Marks nodded. "Hidden observers. They're out there, watching, testing. I've recorded their movements and patterns. We can anticipate them if we remain vigilant." Hale's expression softened, a quiet respect in his eyes. "Good work. Your observations make the battlefield safer for our men." Marks glanced back at the steel tree. Its hollow trunk gleamed faintly in the early light, silent, watchful, and eternal. He understood more than ever that patience, vigilance, and careful observation were as essential as courage. The tree had taught him to see, to feel, and to anticipate, skills that went beyond sight, beyond hearing, into the subtle and hidden layers of the world. Later, lying in his cot, Marks felt the echo of the night linger in his mind. The hidden eyes, the whispers in the fog, the silent sentinel of steel, they had become part of his awareness. Sleep came slowly, intertwined with the silent language of observation, a patient waiting, and the uncanny knowledge that in the hollow steel tree, vigilance was both a necessity and an art. The fog rolled in again as evening approached, soft and relentless, muting the edges of the battlefield and swallowing the trenches in its thick gray embrace. Corporal Marks walked toward the hollow steel tree with quiet, measured steps. His boots sank into the damp earth, leaving shallow imprints in the mud. Each step carried the weight of anticipation and the familiarity of ritual. Tonight, like every night, he would climb into the steel sentinel and listen. The tree loomed ahead, dark and unyielding, yet strangely inviting. Marks placed his hand against the cold metal, feeling the faint hum beneath his fingers. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it seemed to pulse in time with the rhythms of the battlefield. He climbed the ladder carefully, the interior narrowing around him as the outside world faded. Settling into the chamber, he adjusted the viewing slit and exhaled slowly, letting the quiet of the tree settle over him like a protective cloak. Through the slit, the fog had transformed the battlefield into an almost dreamlike panorama. Craters became pools of silver mist, broken trees blurred into ghostly shapes, and distant movements were softened into muted silhouettes. The hollow tree amplified every sound, the faint shuffle of boots on mud, the soft crackle of distant gunfire, and the barely perceptible whispers of wind through shattered timbers. Every detail became part of a larger symphony of subtle signals. As the hours passed, Marks became aware of another layer of communication, silent, almost imperceptible, yet present. It was not human voices, not mechanical signals, but something between. A vibration in the mud, the shift of fog, the faint swish of a distant branch, all carried messages. Marks pressed his hand to the steel wall and felt the subtle resonance, as if the tree itself was conversing with him, translating the battlefield into a language of quiet understanding. Tonight, the conversation was richer than ever. Marks noticed patterns in movement that suggested coordination among enemy posts. Shadows shifted in sequences, faint tapping echoed across craters, and even the fog seemed to hold a rhythm. The hollow steel tree magnified these subtleties, allowing him to follow the invisible dialogue with precision. Each observation, each recorded detail, became a line in a silent conversation between the tree, the battlefield, and himself. Time moved slowly. Marks adjusted his position, jotting down notes and sketches, listening to the rhythms of war layered upon each other. A faint light flickered far across the battlefield, a signal, deliberate and coded. Marks traced it carefully, noting the interval, duration, and intensity. The hollow steel tree vibrated softly beneath his hand, almost as if acknowledging the significance. He realized that the tree was not only a silent observer, it was a participant, guiding his perception, filtering the chaos into discernible messages. The whispers of the night were interrupted briefly by distant artillery, a reminder of the ever-present danger surrounding him. Yet, within the hollow tree, the sounds were tempered, each one measured, each tremor informative. Marks understood the battlefield not just with sight, but with touch, with intuition, with the patient guidance of his metallic companion. He felt connected to every shift in the fog, every whisper of movement, every faint signal hidden within the night. As dawn approached, the fog thinned, revealing the scarred landscape in soft, pale light. Marks descended the ladder, stiff but alert, notebook filled with the night's detailed observations. The hollow steel tree stood silently behind him, patient and enduring, a witness to the unseen, a translator of the subtle language of war. Lieutenant Hale awaited him in the trench. "Reports?" he asked. Marks nodded. "Silent signals, patterns of movement, coordination between enemy posts. The tree helped me interpret more than ever tonight." Hale's gaze softened with respect. "Excellent. Your observations give us a rare advantage." Marks glanced back at the hollow tree. Its metal surface gleamed faintly in the morning light, silent, patient, and eternal. He understood that the battlefield had layers, voices, and rhythms beyond what was immediately visible. The steel tree allowed him to participate in the quiet conversations of war, teaching patience, perception, and the value of listening. Later, lying in his cot, Marks felt the echo of the night linger. The whispers through the slits, the vibrations beneath the mud, the silent language of movement, all remained in his mind. Sleep came slowly, intertwined with the awareness that some of the most important conversations were silent, and that vigilance, when paired with patience, revealed truths hidden even from the most watchful eyes. The battlefield that night seemed almost alive. Fog drifted across the trenches and cratered earth, curling around shattered timbers and barbed wire like a slow, deliberate current. Corporal Marks moved toward the hollow steel tree with careful, measured steps. The earth was soft beneath his boots, a mixture of rain-soaked mud and detritus from weeks of relentless warfare. Each step carried a familiar weight, the anticipation of observation, and the quiet understanding that tonight would demand all his patience. The tree rose ahead, silent and imposing, a dark sentinel against the shifting gray of the fog. Marks placed his hand on its cold surface, feeling the faint vibration that had become so familiar over countless nights. It pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat, a subtle rhythm that seemed to echo the movements of the battlefield itself. Climbing the ladder into the hollow chamber, he felt the comforting constriction of the narrow space, isolating him from the cold, damp air while amplifying the subtle vibrations of the night. Through the slit, the fog transformed the battlefield into a stage of shadows. Craters became pools of diffuse gray, broken trees turned into dark, spectral figures, and distant patrols moved like phantoms. Marx watched intently, aware that every movement, however faint, was part of a silent choreography, an unspoken dance that revealed patterns, intentions, and secrets. Hours passed in quiet vigilance. Marx traced the rhythm of the enemy's movements, noting the subtle shifts in shadow and light. A patrol advanced cautiously, then retreated. Another paused, seemingly uncertain, before continuing along a predictable path. The fog softened their edges, making observation difficult, yet the hollow steel tree amplified the minute details, translating them into signals he could interpret. Then, a new rhythm emerged, a subtle play of light across the mist. Lanterns flickered in sequences, reflecting off the fog, creating patterns that seemed almost choreographed. Marx adjusted his position, following the movements through the slit. Each shadow and flicker conveyed intention, a language of subtle motion that spoke volumes to those patient enough to watch. The steel tree resonated with these signals. Marx pressed his hand against the cold metal, feeling faint vibrations that mirrored the movement outside. He realized the battlefield had a rhythm of its own, an invisible dance that only a careful observer could perceive. The tree, with its hollow steel walls, translated that rhythm into understanding, guiding him through the intricate interplay of shadows, fog, and distant movement. Hours continued in this silent observation. Marx's eyes grew heavy, but he did not relax. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every tremor in the fog could carry vital information. He recorded each pattern, noting intervals, durations, and repetitions. The battlefield's dance was both subtle and complex, revealing strategies, testing vigilance, and exposing weaknesses to those who could interpret it. A sudden pause in the enemy's movements drew Marx's attention. The shadows lingered in the fog, frozen for a heartbeat, then continued in deliberate, measured steps. The hollow steel tree hummed faintly beneath his fingers, almost as if acknowledging the significance of the observation. Marx realized that the dance of shadows was a form of communication, a silent signal among the enemy that could be understood only by the observant. As dawn crept slowly across the battlefield, the fog thinned, revealing the scarred landscape in muted clarity. Marx descended the ladder, stiff but alert, notebook filled with detailed observations of the night's choreography. The hollow steel tree stood silently behind him, a patient guardian, a translator of the subtle, hidden language of movement and intent. Lieutenant Hale awaited him in the trench. "Observations?" he asked quietly. Marx nodded. "Patterns in movement, rhythms of light and shadow. The enemy communicates subtly through these dances. We can anticipate their actions if we remain vigilant." Hale's expression softened with quiet respect. "Excellent. Your vigilance gives us a rare advantage." Marx glanced back at the steel tree. Its hollow trunk glimmered faintly in the first light of morning, silent, patient, and enduring. He understood that the battlefield had its own hidden choreography, and that the hollow steel tree allowed him to perceive, interpret, and anticipate with clarity. The dance of shadows, though invisible to many, had been revealed to him, and the lesson of patient observation had never been clearer. Later, lying in his cot, Marx felt the echoes of the night linger. The subtle rhythms, the silent choreography, the vibrations translated by the steel tree, they remained in his mind. Sleep came slowly, intertwined with the awareness that observation was not merely watching, but understanding the hidden dance of life, movement, and intention across the battlefield. The night fell heavy and still, with the fog rolling across the battlefield like a slow tide, swallowing trenches, craters, and shattered timber in its dense gray embrace. Corporal Marx made his way to the hollow steel tree, boots sinking slightly into the soft, rain-dampened earth. Each step felt weighted, deliberate. He carried with him the knowledge that tonight, the mist itself might speak, and that his patient observation would reveal the messages hidden within it. The tree rose before him, a silent sentinel, dark and unyielding against the creeping fog. Marx pressed a hand against its cold metal trunk, feeling the faint hum that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. It pulsed subtly, in tune with the distant tremors and vibrations of the battlefield, amplifying the hidden life beneath the surface. Climbing into the hollow chamber, he felt the familiar constriction, the protective embrace of steel surrounding him as the outside world blurred into mist and shadow. Through the viewing slit, the battlefield seemed transformed. The fog softened the broken landscape, turning jagged craters and shattered trees into fluid, ghostly shapes. Faint silhouettes moved slowly in the distance, their outlines distorted, their intentions unclear. Yet each movement, each flicker of shadow, carried meaning. Marks began to notice the subtle signals embedded in the enemy's routines: the pause of a patrol, the flicker of a lantern, the rhythm of footsteps in the mud. Hours passed in quiet vigilance. Marks recorded everything, timing each flicker, each pause, each variation. The fog, dense and concealing, seemed to carry these signals to him, softening their edges but amplifying their importance. The hollow steel tree resonated faintly beneath his hand, translating these subtle movements into a language he could understand. Tonight, it was not just observation, it was comprehension, a silent dialogue between the battlefield, the tree, and himself. Then came the unexpected. From the dense mist, a faint series of lights flickered, tiny, deliberate, almost imperceptible. Marks adjusted the periscope, focusing carefully. The pattern repeated, irregular but intentional, a coded signal between enemy positions. Each flicker carried meaning, a silent communication that most would overlook. But Marks, guided by the steel tree, recognized it instantly. He began recording the intervals, the sequence, the subtle variations in intensity. The fog seemed to amplify these signals, carrying them clearly to his position. Marks pressed his hand to the steel wall, feeling the faint vibration echo the rhythm of the lights. The battlefield had its own network of communication, subtle, silent, and invisible to those not attuned to its patterns. The hollow tree allowed him to perceive it fully, translating the hidden language of war into actionable intelligence. Time moved slowly, measured by the rhythm of the signals. Marks traced the movements of distant patrols, cross-referencing them with the flickering lights. Patterns emerged, predictable sequences, pauses indicating hesitation, shifts in position suggesting reconnaissance. Every observation added another layer to his understanding of the battlefield, a mosaic of hidden activity. Suddenly, a soft, irregular tapping reached him through the fog, different from the light signals. Marks pressed closer to the viewing slit, straining to interpret. It was faint, almost cautious, yet deliberate. The enemy was testing, probing, perhaps sending messages along a network of hidden observers. Marks recorded the sequence carefully, noting timing, repetition, and intensity. The hollow steel tree vibrated faintly, as if acknowledging the significance. By the time dawn approached, the mist had begun to thin, revealing the battlefield in pale, muted light. Marks descended the ladder, stiff but alert, notebook filled with observations and interpretations. The hollow steel tree stood silently behind him, patient, unwavering, a translator of signals hidden in fog, shadow, and movement. Lieutenant Hale met him at the trench. "Reports?" he asked softly. Marks nodded. "Signals in the mist. Lights, movements, tapping, they all carry messages. We can anticipate their actions if we interpret them carefully." Hale's expression softened with respect. "Excellent work. Your vigilance gives us an edge most don't have." Marks looked back at the tree. Its hollow trunk glimmered faintly in the morning light, silent, enduring, and alive in its own way. The battlefield had spoken through the mist, and he had listened. Patience, perception, and the subtle art of observation had revealed the enemy's hidden communications, and the hollow steel tree had guided him, translating whispers into understanding. Later, lying in his cot, Marks felt the echo of the night linger in his mind. The flickering lights, the tapping signals, the subtle movements through the mist, they remained, etched into his awareness. Sleep came slowly, entwined with the knowledge that the battlefield communicated constantly, silently, and that the steel tree allowed him to hear, interpret, and survive through patient observation. Night had settled over the battlefield with a velvet hush, thick fog curling across craters and trenches, softening the shattered landscape into shapes both eerie and mesmerizing. Corporal Marks approached the hollow steel tree with measured steps. Each footfall sank into the damp earth, leaving a trail that would vanish with the mist. The tree loomed ahead, dark and silent, yet somehow alive, as if it waited not merely for him, but for the secrets of the battlefield itself. Marks placed his hand against the cold metal trunk, feeling its faint vibration, a pulse that had become almost familiar over countless nights of observation. It was subtle, persistent, a quiet heartbeat resonating through the earth. He climbed into the narrow chamber, the steel walls enclosing him with a comforting constriction. The world outside seemed distant, softened by fog, yet amplified in its hidden signals. Tonight, the tree would reveal more than just movement. It would whisper secrets that only patient ears could hear. Through the viewing slit, the battlefield appeared as a ghostly panorama. Craters became pools of silver mist, shattered timbers blurred into spectral forms, and distant patrols moved like phantoms, their paths softened and distorted by fog. Marks observed patiently, noting every flicker of light, every rustle in the mud, every subtle shift in shadow. The hollow steel tree translated these signals, transforming faint movements and vibrations into intelligible information, a silent dialogue between observer, sentinel, and the hidden world outside. Hours passed. Marks noticed patterns emerging in the enemy's actions, signals hidden in the rhythm of footsteps, coded lantern flickers, the timing of subtle pauses. The battlefield spoke in a language that only the observant could comprehend, and the tree amplified it. He felt as though he was eavesdropping on the thoughts of the land itself, on the silent strategies whispered through shadow, fog, and vibration. Then, as the night deepened, Marx discovered something unexpected. Beneath the soft rumble of distant artillery and the faint shuffling of boots, there were subtle tremors in the earth that didn't match any known pattern. Faint, deliberate, almost imperceptible, they pulsed through the mud with a rhythm suggesting intention rather than accident. Marx pressed his hand against the steel wall, feeling the vibrations translate into something comprehensible. The tree was revealing a secret layer of the battlefield, movements of tunneling, hidden supply lines, and activity invisible to any conventional observer. The sentinel had a way of amplifying these hidden signals, teasing meaning out of the subtle chaos. Marx traced each pulse, timing intervals, noting patterns, and cross-referencing them with what he observed above ground. Slowly, a picture emerged, a hidden web of preparation and movement, a secret lifeline the enemy thought was invisible. Every tremor, every subtle quiver of the earth, was a word in a language the tree helped him understand. Time slipped by as Marx immersed himself in the observation. The hollow steel tree became more than a passive guard. It was an interpreter, translating vibrations into intelligence, chaos into understanding. He realized that the battlefield held countless secrets, concealed beneath fog, shadow, and mud, and that the tree's presence allowed him to perceive these secrets with clarity. A sudden, distinct shift caught his attention. Beneath a distant mound, a faint movement suggested excavation, tunnels being dug, supplies being shifted, plans being enacted in silence. Marx recorded the sequence carefully, noting duration, intervals, and intensity. The steel walls of the hollow tree vibrated faintly, acknowledging the significance of his observation. The tree, silent and unyielding, had become a partner in uncovering secrets the battlefield tried to hide. By dawn, the fog had begun to lift, revealing the scarred terrain in muted light. Marx descended the ladder, stiff, alert, and filled with the knowledge of a night spent unraveling the hidden layers of war. The hollow steel tree stood silently behind him, patient, enduring, and infinitely knowing. It had revealed its secret, the subtle language of vibrations beneath the surface, hidden movements, and unseen patterns, and he had listened. Lieutenant Hale awaited him in the trench. "Find anything unusual?" he asked quietly. Marx nodded. "The tree revealed underground activity, hidden movements and preparations. We can anticipate much of what the enemy tries to conceal." Hale's gaze softened in appreciation. "Good work. That intelligence could save lives." Marx looked back at the tree. Its hollow trunk glimmered faintly in the early morning light, silent, eternal, and almost mystical in presence. The battlefield had spoken in whispers, and the sentinel had translated them. He understood that the war was not only fought above ground but also in hidden layers, in shadows, in tremors, and that patience, vigilance, and careful observation could reveal the secrets that most would never perceive. Later, lying in his cot, Marx felt the echo of the night linger. The subtle vibrations, the hidden tremors, the unspoken messages carried through fog and shadow, they remained etched in his mind. Sleep came slowly, entwined with the understanding that the hollow steel tree was more than metal. It was a guardian, a translator, and a silent partner in the art of survival. Night had wrapped the battlefield in a dense, quiet cloak. The fog rolled low over trenches and craters, softening jagged earth into blurred forms. Corporal Marx approached the hollow steel tree with the practiced, careful steps of someone who had learned to move without leaving a trace. The ground was slick with rain and mud, each step absorbed into the mist that seemed to swallow the world whole. The tree stood ahead, dark, silent, and unmoving, yet somehow alive, an ancient sentinel waiting to reveal what the night had concealed. Marx placed a hand on the cold, smooth metal of the trunk. A familiar, faint hum pulsed beneath his fingertips, subtle and constant, as if the tree breathed with the battlefield itself. Climbing the ladder, he slid into the narrow interior, the walls enclosing him tightly. Outside, the world faded. Inside, every vibration, every sound, every whisper carried significance amplified by the steel's sentinel. Through the slit, the battlefield was transformed by fog into a surreal stage of shadows. Shapes emerged and vanished, distant patrols moved like specters, and the occasional flicker of lantern light traced ghostly paths across the gray. Marx observed patiently, knowing that within the silence, messages were hidden, movements, intentions, and signals masked by mist and darkness. Hours passed as he recorded every nuance. Footsteps, shifting equipment, the faint scrape of a crate, each sound became part of a hidden language. The fog concealed, but also revealed to a patient observer. Marx felt the steel walls resonate subtly with the vibrations, translating the battlefield's quiet signals into a comprehension that was almost tactile. The tree had a way of turning the silence into communication, the absence of sound into knowledge. Then, something shifted. A faint, deliberate motion emerged from the fog. A patrol moved along a predictable route, but pauses along the way suggested signaling, testing the vigilance of unseen eyes. Marks noted every subtle detail, every hesitation, and every flicker of light, interpreting the silent language of coordination. The hollow steel tree hummed faintly beneath his hand, acknowledging each observation, guiding him through layers of movement that the naked eye might have missed. The veil of silence deepened as the night progressed. The enemy seemed to move with the confidence of the unaware, yet their patterns betrayed intention. Marks traced the rhythm of their actions, pauses, repetitions, subtle shifts that suggested concealed strategies. Every faint whisper of movement, every tremor through mud or timber, became meaningful, revealing the invisible dance of preparation. As hours slipped by, Marks noticed another layer beneath the movements, subtle vibrations in the earth itself. The hollow tree translated these tiny signals, vibrations that indicated activity beyond sight, perhaps digging, shifting equipment, or underground maneuvers. Each tremor carried a story, a hidden message waiting to be decoded. Marks documented every pulse, every quiver, understanding that the enemy's secrets often lay beneath the surface, invisible to all but the most attentive observer. Toward the pre-dawn hours, the fog grew thicker, wrapping the battlefield in a ghostly embrace. Marks pressed his hand against the steel wall, feeling the vibrations resonate through him. The silence was no longer empty, it was full of meaning. The tree had taught him that patience and vigilance transformed absence into understanding, that stillness could reveal far more than motion ever could. By morning, the fog began to lift. Marks descended the ladder, stiff but alert, notebook filled with observations of movements, vibrations, and silent signals. The hollow steel tree stood quietly behind him, unwavering, a patient guardian of knowledge and secrets. Lieutenant Hale met him at the trench. "Anything significant?" he asked softly. Marks nodded. The veil of silence revealed patterns in their movement and hidden activity beneath the surface. "With careful observation, we can anticipate their intentions." Hale's gaze reflected respect and quiet admiration. "Good. That intelligence could save lives." Marks glanced back at the hollow tree. Its metal surface gleamed faintly in the early light, silent, eternal, and almost alive in presence. The battlefield had spoken through the veil of silence, and the steel sentinel had translated it. He realized that war was not just a contest of weapons, but a dialogue of patience, vigilance, and subtle observation, and the tree was his guide. Later, lying in his cot, Marks felt the echoes of the night linger. The whispers of movement, the tremors through the earth, the subtle messages hidden in silence, they remained in his mind. Sleep came slowly, intertwined with understanding that observation, patience, and awareness were the truest weapons on the battlefield. The fog crept across the battlefield like a living thing, curling into trenches, clinging to the edges of craters, and softening every broken tree and shattered timber into spectral forms. Corporal Marks approached the hollow steel tree with cautious steps, boots sinking slightly into the rain-slicked earth. Each footfall was measured, deliberate. He moved with the rhythm of someone who had learned that patience was as important as vigilance. The tree stood ahead, dark, silent, and imposing, yet somehow alive, as if it had been waiting for him all day to reveal the secrets hidden in the mist. Marks placed his hand against the cold steel trunk. The familiar hum resonated faintly beneath his fingertips, subtle but persistent, a quiet pulse that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the battlefield itself. Climbing into the narrow chamber, he felt the comforting constriction of the walls around him. Outside, the world dissolved into fog and shadow, but within the tree, every vibration, sound, and flicker was amplified, clear and precise. Through the viewing slit, the battlefield was transformed into a ghostly panorama. Shapes drifted like phantoms, distant patrols moved with deliberate uncertainty, and the faint glow of lanterns flickered through the haze. Marks observed intently, understanding that in the fog, the smallest movement or light could carry a message. Every subtle motion was a piece of communication, a signpost in a network of hidden observation. Hours passed in quiet scrutiny. Marks traced the paths of patrols, noting pauses and hesitations. He watched shadows stretch and contract in the mist, lantern lights flicker in sequences that suggested signaling, and the barely perceptible quiver of distant equipment as it shifted through the mud. Each observation built a map of unseen activity, revealing strategies that were invisible to those who looked superficially. Then came the subtle realization: the fog itself became a messenger. Marks noticed faint distortions in the swirling mist, tiny currents that carried sound and vibration. A shuffle here, a pause there, the soft scrape of a crate, all were amplified by the hollow steel tree, transforming these minute signs into intelligible signals. He began to see patterns emerging from the chaos, patrols communicating with hidden posts, movements choreographed to avoid detection, signals embedded in silence itself. The hollow steel tree pulsed faintly beneath his hand, as if acknowledging each discovery. Marks felt the symbiosis of observer and sentinel. The tree was not merely a passive tool, but an active partner, translating the subtle language of the fog and shadows into comprehension. He could anticipate enemy movements before they happened, understanding their rhythm, predicting the unseen strategies unfolding beneath the surface. Hours continued in this quiet vigilance. A distant patrol shifted unexpectedly, and Marks noticed a faint light flicker, an almost imperceptible signal of intent. He recorded the timing, the sequence, and the subtle variations, understanding that this was part of a broader network of communication. The fog hid it from ordinary sight, but through the steel tree, every hidden eye revealed itself. As dawn approached, the mist began to thin, revealing the scarred battlefield in muted, pale light. Marks descended the ladder, stiff but alert, notebook filled with observations of movements, signals, and hidden patterns. The hollow steel tree stood behind him, silent, patient, and seemingly eternal, a guardian of knowledge and interpreter of the unseen. Lieutenant Hale awaited him in the trench. "Reports?" he asked, his voice low. Marks nodded. "Eyes in the fog. Patrols signaling through subtle movements and lantern flickers. Hidden posts coordinating silently. We can anticipate their actions if we interpret these signals carefully." Hale's expression softened with quiet respect. "Good work. That intelligence could make all the difference." Marks glanced back at the steel tree. Its hollow trunk gleamed faintly in the morning light, silent and watchful. The battlefield had spoken through fog, shadows, and subtle signals, and the tree had translated it. He realized that the war was as much about seeing the unseen as it was about fighting, and that patient observation was a weapon more powerful than most could imagine. Later, lying in his cot, Marks felt the echo of the night linger. The movement of shadows, the flicker of lanterns, the subtle rhythm of patrols, they remained in his mind. Sleep came slowly, intertwined with the knowledge that vigilance, patience, and understanding the hidden language of the battlefield were as essential as courage itself. The battlefield lay under a heavy blanket of night, the fog curling through trenches and over cratered earth like a living, breathing presence. Corporal Marks moved cautiously toward the hollow steel tree, each step soft, deliberate, leaving fleeting impressions in the rain-soaked soil. The night was quiet, yet alive with subtle vibrations that only the most attentive observer could perceive. The steel tree waited patiently, its dark trunk looming in the mist, silent but expectant, as if it knew the secrets that the night had yet to reveal. Marks pressed his hand against the cold metal, feeling the familiar, faint hum beneath his fingers. It pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and persistent, carrying with it the resonance of the ground itself. Climbing into the narrow interior, he felt the protective embrace of the walls around him, isolating him from the fog while amplifying every tremor, whisper, and vibration. The world outside became distant, yet intimately connected through the subtle language of movement and sound. Through the viewing slit, the fog transformed the battlefield into a surreal, almost spectral landscape. Shapes appeared and dissolved like shadows in a dream, distant patrols moved with deliberate care, and the occasional flicker of lantern light traced ghostly arcs through the gray haze. Marks focused not just on what he could see, but on what he could feel, the faint vibrations in the earth, the tremors beneath the mud, the whispers of hidden activity. Each subtle signal carried meaning, a message concealed within the very fabric of the battlefield. Hours passed in patient observation. Marks traced the rhythm of the tremors, noting how each shudder of the earth corresponded with distant movements. A soft shift in the mud, a subtle scrape against the timber, a faint vibration from beneath a mound, all were signs of activity, perhaps of tunneling, repositioning, or clandestine supply movement. The hollow steel tree resonated with each pulse, translating them into information that Marks could interpret and record. The whispers of the earth became more pronounced as the night deepened. Marks noticed patterns emerging from the chaos, tremors that followed a sequence, vibrations that suggested planning and coordination, subtle shifts indicating concealed operations. Each signal, though faint, carried significance. The tree amplified these whispers, allowing him to perceive what would have otherwise been invisible to the untrained observer. Suddenly, a more pronounced vibration caught his attention, a subtle, rhythmic thud beneath a distant mound. Marks leaned closer to the slit, tracing the pulse with careful precision. It suggested movement beneath the surface, perhaps a supply cache being relocated or a small tunnel being excavated. He recorded the timing, the intensity, the sequence, aware that understanding these hidden movements could provide critical intelligence. The hollow steel tree vibrated faintly beneath his hand, almost as if acknowledging the discovery. Marks realized that the battlefield was speaking through more than just visible movements. The earth itself carried information, hidden from view but perceptible to those patient enough to feel, to listen, and to interpret. Through the tree, he could translate these whispers into actionable understanding, turning tremors into insight. Hours slipped by in this quiet vigilance. The fog thickened and thinned in irregular waves, carrying distant sounds with it, and masking movements beneath its misty veil. Marks documented each vibration, each whisper of the earth, every subtle change in rhythm. Patterns emerged, sequences of tremors corresponding with above-ground patrols, shifts in equipment, and concealed operations. The steel tree allowed him to map these hidden signals, connecting the visible and invisible threads of the battlefield. By dawn, the fog began to lift, revealing the scarred landscape in pale, muted light. Marks descended the ladder, stiff and alert, notebook filled with observations of both the seen and unseen. The hollow steel tree stood behind him, silent, patient, and enduring, a guardian of secrets and a translator of hidden communication. Lieutenant Hale waited in the trench. "Any new developments?" he asked quietly. Marks nodded. "Whispers of the earth. Tremors, vibrations, underground movement. The enemy's hidden activity is more extensive than we realized, but we can anticipate it if we pay attention." Hale's eyes reflected respect and cautious admiration. "Excellent. That could make a difference out there." Marks glanced back at the hollow tree. Its metallic surface gleamed faintly in the early light, silent, patient, and almost sentient in its presence. The battlefield had revealed its hidden language through vibrations and whispers, and the tree had translated it. He understood that war was fought not only with weapons and courage but also with perception, patience, and the ability to listen to the secrets the earth itself carried. Later, lying in his cot, Marks felt the echo of the night linger. The tremors, the subtle shifts, the hidden messages beneath the fog, they remained in his mind. Sleep came slowly, intertwined with the knowledge that understanding the battlefield required not only sight but touch, patience, and the guidance of a sentinel that could reveal what the eye alone could not perceive. The night had descended over the battlefield like a velvet shroud, fog curling through trenches and around shattered trees, muting the chaos into ghostly forms. Corporal Marks approached the hollow steel tree, boots sinking slightly into the damp, uneven earth. Every step was measured. He had learned that silence and patience were as essential as vigilance. The tree stood before him, dark and still, yet almost alive, waiting to reveal what the shadows and mist might conceal. Marks pressed a hand to the cold metal trunk, feeling the faint, familiar pulse beneath his fingers. It resonated subtly, a quiet rhythm that seemed to echo the distant heartbeat of the battlefield. Climbing into the narrow chamber, he felt the comforting confinement of steel walls, insulating him from the damp fog outside while amplifying every vibration, sound, and motion. The world beyond became muted, yet every subtle signal was heightened within the tree's protective embrace. Through the viewing slit, the fog transformed the battlefield into a surreal, almost dreamlike landscape. Shapes drifted like phantoms, distant patrols moved with careful deliberation, and the occasional flicker of lantern light traced ghostly arcs. Marks observed with unwavering attention, aware that every movement or pause could carry crucial meaning. Tonight, patience was vital, for subtlety could mask danger, and even the smallest flicker might serve as a warning. Hours passed in concentrated observation. Marks noted the rhythm of patrols, pauses in movement, and shifts in shadow. The fog softened edges and obscured details, yet the hollow steel tree translated these subtle cues, transforming them into comprehensible information. Every flicker of light, every quiet rustle, every tremor through the mud became a word in the battlefield's hidden language. Then, something unusual caught his attention, a faint flicker of light, almost imperceptible, far in the distance. It pulsed irregularly, a subtle warning buried within the rhythm of the night. Marks leaned closer to the viewing slit, heart quickening. He recognized the signal immediately, a warning, deliberate and cautious, likely indicating enemy reconnaissance or an approaching patrol. He recorded the timing, intensity, and pattern, knowing this small observation could avert disaster. The fog seemed to carry the warning directly to him. The hollow steel tree vibrated faintly under his hand, almost as if affirming the importance of the flicker. Marks realized that the battlefield communicated constantly, in layers invisible to the casual observer. The tree served as translator and amplifier, converting subtle signs into actionable intelligence. He tracked the source of the flicker carefully, noting corresponding movements in the distant patrols. Patterns emerged, pauses that coincided with the light, shifts in position that suggested testing the defenses, and a rhythm of movement that could reveal a plan or strategy. Each signal, no matter how slight, carried weight. The hollow steel tree allowed him to perceive it with clarity, granting insight into the hidden intentions of the enemy. The night continued, thick with fog and tension. Marks observed, recording, interpreting, and anticipating. The flicker repeated sporadically, each time followed by subtle adjustments in patrol routes and positions. The hollow steel tree hummed faintly beneath his fingers, a silent companion in understanding the battlefield's hidden language. He felt a growing respect for the way the enemy communicated without speaking, signaling without revealing, moving through shadow with intent. As dawn approached, the fog began to lift, revealing the war-torn landscape in muted light. Marks descended the ladder, notebook filled with observations of signals, flickers, and warnings. The hollow steel tree stood silently behind him, patient, enduring, a sentinel of hidden knowledge. Lieutenant Hale awaited him in the trench. "Any unusual activity?" he asked softly. Marks nodded. "A flicker of warning, subtle signals indicating reconnaissance. I've recorded the patterns. We can anticipate their movements." Hale's eyes reflected appreciation and cautious relief. "Excellent. That information could save lives tonight." Marks glanced back at the steel tree. Its hollow trunk glimmered faintly in the early light, silent, almost sentient. The battlefield had whispered its warning, and the tree had translated it. He realized that war was not only fought with weapons but also with observation, patience, and the ability to understand the hidden cues embedded in fog, shadow, and light. Later, lying in his cot, Marks felt the echoes of the night linger. The faint flicker, the subtle shifts, the silent warnings, they remained etched in his mind. Sleep came slowly, entwined with the understanding that vigilance, perception, and the guidance of the hollow sentinel were among the greatest tools a soldier could possess. The fog hung heavy over the battlefield, a gray curtain that swallowed trenches, craters, and shattered timber alike. Corporal Marks approached the hollow steel tree, boots sinking into the damp earth with each measured step. The night was quiet, but he knew better. Silence often concealed the most crucial signals. The tree loomed ahead, dark and unmoving, yet somehow alive, waiting to reveal the hidden movements of the enemy. Marks placed a hand on the cold metal trunk. The familiar hum pulsed faintly beneath his fingers, subtle and steady, almost like a heartbeat. Climbing into the narrow chamber, he felt the protective walls of steel surround him, insulating him from the fog while amplifying every vibration, sound, and subtle motion. Through the viewing slit, the world outside transformed into a blurred, spectral panorama, where shadow and mist became allies in observation. Hours passed in quiet vigilance. Marks watched patrols move with deliberate care, noting pauses, shifts in formation, and the faint glow of lanterns cutting through the fog. Each movement became a word, each flicker of light a sentence in the battlefield's hidden language. Through the hollow steel tree, he was seeing the war as the enemy intended to conceal it, interpreting signals they believed were invisible. Then he noticed something extraordinary, a sequence of movements, subtle yet deliberate, that revealed the enemy's strategy. A patrol paused at a certain crater, their lantern flickering twice, signaling to a hidden observer. Marks followed the rhythm, noting how shadows shifted, how distant figures adjusted positions, and how silent coordination shaped the fog-laden battlefield. He realized he was seeing through their eyes, anticipating their decisions before they executed them. The tree hummed faintly beneath his hands, reinforcing the sense of connection. Marks traced the sequence, recording every pause, every gesture, every faint quiver of the ground beneath the enemy's feet. The hollow steel tree amplified signals invisible to ordinary sight, allowing him to map not only movement but intention. For the first time, he felt as though he understood the battlefield from both sides, as if he were looking through the eyes of the enemy without leaving the safety of his steel sentinel. Hours blended together. The fog thickened, then thinned, each shift revealing new patterns and connections. Marks followed subtle cues, pauses, glances, shifts of equipment, and the faintest tremors beneath the mud. Each signal was a revelation, each observation a piece of a puzzle hidden from the naked eye. The hollow steel tree made the invisible perceptible, translating motion into meaning, chaos into strategy. Suddenly, a patrol altered its route unexpectedly. Marks recognized the flicker of light, a coded warning. The enemy believed it concealed, but through the tree, he could anticipate their next move. Adjusting his own notes, he predicted the patrol's path, timing, and likely destination. The battlefield, in fog and shadow, had revealed its intentions, and he was prepared. By the early morning, the mist lifted slightly, unveiling the scarred landscape in muted light. Marks descended the ladder, notebook filled with insights into movements, strategies, and signals. The hollow steel tree stood silently behind him, patient and unwavering, a sentinel of knowledge that bridged perception and understanding. Lieutenant Hale awaited him. "Any developments?" he asked quietly. Marks nodded. "Through their eyes. I tracked movements and signals that reveal intentions. We can anticipate their actions and adjust ours accordingly." Hale's respect was evident. "Excellent. That kind of insight is invaluable." Marks looked back at the tree. Its hollow trunk gleamed faintly in the morning light, silent yet almost sentient. He realized the war was fought not only with weapons and courage but with perception, patience, and the ability to understand the hidden language of the enemy. The hollow steel tree had granted him that gift, a bridge into the unseen world of strategy and shadow. Later, lying in his cot, Marks replayed the night in his mind. The flickers, the tremors, the subtle adjustments, they remained vivid. Sleep came slowly, wrapped in the awareness that vigilance, observation, and the guidance of the hollow sentinel were the keys to survival and understanding in a battlefield shrouded in fog and secrecy. The first light of dawn began to touch the battlefield, muted and gray, revealing the scars of shellfire, shattered timber, and churned mud. Corporal Marks approached the hollow steel tree one last time for the night, his boots sinking softly into the wet soil. The fog had thinned, but the air still carried the memory of darkness, of secrets whispered through vibrations, shadow, and subtle movement. The tree loomed ahead, silent, imposing, yet patient, an ever-watchful guardian that had borne witness to the night's hidden truths. Marks pressed a hand to the cool metal, feeling the faint, familiar hum beneath his fingers. The pulse was steady, constant, almost comforting. Climbing into the narrow chamber, he felt the embrace of steel walls close around him, isolating him from the world while connecting him to it in a way that was almost mystical. Outside, the battlefield was waking, soldiers stirring, patrols moving cautiously, but inside the tree, every sound, every vibration, every subtle shift became magnified, intelligible, and alive. Through the viewing slit, the familiar panorama stretched before him. The fog had lifted to reveal the scarred earth, trenches still filled with mist, and distant patrols adjusting their positions. Marks watched, recording, interpreting, noting the tiny signals, the rhythm of movement, and the faint whispers of the earth beneath boots and equipment. The hollow steel tree translated it all, transforming subtle chaos into actionable intelligence, revealing the battlefield in ways no ordinary observer could perceive. Hours passed. Marks traced patterns in the enemy's actions, predicted shifts, and noted movements that would have been invisible without the tree's amplification. Each tremor, each flicker of light, each pause and shadow told a story, a silent narrative of strategy, caution, and intent. The tree had been more than a tool. It was a companion, a teacher, and a guide. It had granted him insight into a world hidden in plain sight, where patience and perception outweighed courage and firepower. Marks thought about all the nights he had spent in the hollow trees, listening to the whispers of the battlefield. He recalled tremors in the earth, flickers of lantern light, subtle shifts in patrols, all translating into understanding. He remembered the long hours in the fog, interpreting the silent signals, predicting the enemy's actions, and discovering hidden patterns that could save lives. The steel tree had been both a shield and a window, revealing the invisible while keeping him safe from harm. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky with pale gold, Marks climbed down from the tree. His body was stiff, his hands cold, but his mind was alive with the knowledge of the night. The hollow steel tree stood behind him, silent, unyielding, and eternal, a guardian not of men, but of secrets. It had watched, it had listened, and it had taught him the subtle art of observation. Lieutenant Hale waited in the trench. "How did the night go?" he asked softly. Marks smiled faintly. The tree revealed everything the enemy tried to hide. "I've recorded the patterns, the signals, the hidden movements. We can anticipate their strategies." Hale's respect was evident in his eyes. "That kind of insight, it could change everything out here." Marks glanced back at the hollow steel tree. Its metal surface gleamed faintly in the morning light, silent, patient, and seemingly alive. He realized then that the true lesson of the tree was more than observation. It was about patience, attention, and understanding that the battlefield communicated constantly, through tremors, shadow, sound, and light, and that survival depended on the ability to listen. Later, lying in his cot, Marks reflected on all he had learned. The hollow steel trees were silent guardians, witnesses to the secrets of war, interpreters of the unseen. They taught patience, precision, and perception. They revealed the hidden rhythms of battle, the movements concealed in shadow and fog, and the subtle language of the earth itself. Through them, he had seen the battlefield as no ordinary soldier could, understanding that vigilance and observation were as crucial as courage and skill. Sleep finally came, slow and deep, cradled by the knowledge that the hollow steel trees stood patiently across the battlefield. They were more than metal and camouflage. They were silent partners, guardians of knowledge, and teachers of the art of war hidden in shadow. Marks knew that as long as these sentinels stood, no secret would remain undetected, no whisper unheard, and no detail overlooked. The battlefield had spoken, and through the silent guardian, he had listened.